Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It all started with my brother and me finding those tracks. We had this secret fishing hole, a spot way back in the woods behind our house where the creek widened out and the bass were always biting. We'd been going there for years, since we were little kids. But one afternoon we showed up and found these huge barefoot prints in the mud along the bank. I mean, they were massive, way bigger than any human foot I'd ever seen. My brother, he's always been the cautious one, and he freaked out. He kept saying we shouldn't go back, that something wasn't right. He got obsessed with it, checking the area every time we went, and he'd get this scared look in his eyes, like he was waiting for something to jump out at us. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just some animal, or maybe a prank. But the fear got to me too after a while. Weeks went by, and my brother refused to go back to the fishing hole. He'd make excuses, say the weather was bad or he had homework, but I knew he was scared. Me, I was 12 and stubborn. I missed the quiet of that place, the way the sun filtered through the trees and the water sounded like it was whispering secrets. So one Saturday, I decided to go alone. It was one of those hot, sticky Oklahoma afternoons where the air feels heavy and the bugs are buzzing everywhere. I told my mom I was going for a bike ride, but I headed straight for the woods. The walk to the fishing hole always took about 20 minutes from our house. I remember the path well. It was narrow, with overhanging branches that scratched at my arms if I wasn't careful. The ground was soft from recent rains, and the smell of damp earth and pine filled my nose. As I got closer, I could hear the creek gurgling, and it made me relax a little. But then I noticed how quiet everything else was. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling in the leaves. It was like the forest was holding its breath. When I reached the fishing hole, the first thing I saw was the mud where we'd found the tracks. They were still there, faded but visible, and my stomach tightened. I tried to ignore it and set up my fishing rod near a big rock I always sat on. The water was clear that day, and I could see minnows darting around near the shore. I cast my line and waited, letting the stillness sink in. But after a few minutes, I heard a crack in the woods behind me. Not a small crack, like a twig snapping, but something heavier, like a branch breaking under weight. I turned around slowly, my heart starting to beat faster. That's when I saw the black bear. It was about 50 feet away, standing near a cluster of trees, and it looked right at me. Bears aren't uncommon around there, but they usually keep their distance. This one, though, it seemed nervous. Its ears were pinned back, and it was sniffing the air like it smelled something bad. Then, all of a sudden, it bolted, not away from me, but in the opposite direction, like it was running from something. That's when the hair on my arms stood up. Why would a bear run like that? I stood there for a second, frozen, trying to make sense of it. The forest was dead silent again, and the air felt colder, like the temperature had dropped out of nowhere. I scanned the trees, my eyes straining to see anything moving. That's when I noticed it, a figure kneeling by the water's edge, maybe 30 feet to my left. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hunter or someone from town. But as I looked closer, my breath caught in my throat. It was crouched down, and it had this long, matted, reddish-brown hair all over its body. Its skin was grayish, like it was covered in dirt or ash, and it had a beard, not a human beard, but more like thick, coarse hair around its face. Its face. God, I'll never forget that face. It was deranged, with deep-set eyes that seemed too dark, and a mouth that was slightly open, showing teeth that looked too big for its head. It was staring right at me, and its eyes locked with mine. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, calculating, like it was sizing me up. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. My body went cold, and I felt this primal fear wash over me, the kind that tells you to run without making a sound. It was like every instinct in me was screaming that this thing was dangerous, that I was prey. Then it moved. It rose up slowly, and I realized how massive it was, 7 or 8 feet tall, easily. Its shoulders were broad, and its arms hung down past its knees. It didn't make a sound as it stood there, just kept staring at me with those unsettling eyes. My fishing rod was still in the water, and I saw a fish tug on the line. In one swift motion, the creature reached down, snatched the fish out of the creek with its hand, and then it was gone. It didn't run or walk away, it just vanished into the trees, like it melted into the shadows. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. I stood there, trembling, my legs feeling like jelly. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. I didn't wait around. I grabbed my fishing rod, my hands shaking so bad I could barely reel in the line, and I started jogging back toward home. I didn't run full out because some part of me was afraid that if I made too much noise, it would come back. I moved as quietly as I could, my ears straining for any sound behind me. The whole way, I kept expecting to feel a hand on my shoulder or hear heavy footsteps following me. The woods had never felt so big and empty before, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. When I got home, I was covered in sweat and my heart was still racing. My brother was in his room and I burst in, my words tumbling out in a rush. I told him everything. The bear running, the kneeling figure, the way it looked at me, how it took the fish. I called it a forest giant because that's what it felt like, something ancient and out of place. He just stared at me, his face pale, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he whispered, "I told you we shouldn't go back." We never talked about it much after that, but it changed both of us. I stopped going to the fishing hole, and so did he. Sometimes I'd catch him looking out the window toward the woods, and I knew he was thinking about it too. For me, the worst part wasn't the size of the thing or how it moved. It was that moment when our eyes met. It was like it saw right through me, and I felt this deep instinctual warning that I was in the presence of something I wasn't supposed to see. Even now, as an adult, I can't explain what it was. People talk about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but this felt different, more personal, more real. I don't know if it was a bear that changed into something else or some kind of creature that lives out there in the Oklahoma woods, but I do know that I'll never forget that day. It stuck with me, like a shadow I can't shake. And every time I hear a strange noise in the night, I think of those eyes and the way the forest went silent, and I'm right back there, 12 years old and terrified, wondering what else is out there watching us. Story 2. That day, it was one of those late afternoons where the sun starts dipping behind the hills, and everything gets that golden glow before dusk settles in. My brother and I were out by the stream that cuts through the lower part of the property. We'd spent hours there before, just being kids, catching frogs, skipping stones, all like that day, trying to build a dam out of rocks and mud. The stream wasn't deep, maybe knee-high in spots, but it had a steady flow that made it perfect for messing around. I remember the water was cold on my bare feet, and the mud squelched between my toes as we piled up stones. The air had that earthy smell after a light rain earlier, and the trees around us were thick with leaves, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch farther as the light faded. We were both focused on what we were doing, laughing and joking, but after a while I started feeling uneasy. It's hard to describe, but it was like that feeling you get when you know someone's watching you, even though you can't see anyone. The hairs on my arms stood up, and the back of my neck felt prickly. I shrugged it off at first, thinking it was just the cooling air, or maybe an animal moving in the woods. But it didn't go away. Instead, it grew heavier, like the whole forest had gone quiet. Normally, you'd hear birds chirping or squirrels rustling, but everything had hushed up, like the world was holding its breath. I turned to my brother and said, "Hey, do you feel that? Something's off." He was a year younger than me, but we were close, and he usually picked up on my vibes. He paused, looking around, and nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's too quiet," he muttered, his voice low. We kept working, but the fun had drained out of it. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, and I kept glancing over my shoulder into the trees. The woods there weren't dense like a jungle, but they were old growth with tall oaks and pines that blocked out a lot of light, making it feel darker than it should have been that time of day. Then, as I was jumping across the stream with a big rock in my hands, I heard it, a loud snap, like a thick branch breaking. It came from maybe 30 feet away, deeper in the woods, and it wasn't from us. We hadn't been moving anything that could make a sound like that. It was sharp and sudden, and it echoed in the silence. My brother and I froze, our eyes locking. That's when the feeling intensified, like a weight pressing down on us. I could feel my stomach knot up, and my hands got clammy. The air felt colder, and I swear I could smell something musky, like wet fur or damp earth, but stronger than usual. We didn't say much after that. We just knew we had to get out of there. Our BB guns were lying on the other side of the creek where we'd left them earlier. We always brought them along for target practice or in case we saw a snake, but they felt useless now. I scrambled over to grab mine, my feet slipping on the wet rocks. The water splashed up my legs, and I remember how the cold seeped through my jeans, making me shiver. My brother followed, but he was slower, his eyes darting around like he was trying to see what was out there. Between us and the path home was this 4-foot wooden fence that marked the edge of the pasture. It wasn't high, but it felt like a barrier now. I reached it first, my heart pounding in my ears. I slung my BB gun over my shoulder and started climbing over, the wood rough under my hands. As I swung my leg over the top, I glanced back toward the stream just to make sure nothing was following us. And that's when I saw it. Crouched behind a big oak tree, maybe 20 feet away, was this huge, black, hairy figure. It was low to the ground, but I could tell it was massive, way bigger than a person. Its fur was matted and dark, almost blending into the shadows, but the shape was unmistakable. What got me were the eyes, big and black, like pools of oil, and they were fixed right on me. They didn't blink. They just stared, intense and unblinking. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second I couldn't move. It was like time slowed down, and all I could see were those eyes, boring into me. Then instinct kicked in. I screamed my brother's name, my voice cracking with panic. I fumbled with my BB gun, pumping it once to chamber a round. It was just a BB gun, but in that moment it felt like my only defense. The sound of the pump was loud in the quiet, and I saw the figure shift slightly, like it was preparing to move. I didn't wait to see more. I dropped down from the fence and started running toward the clearing ahead, my legs feeling like jelly. I could hear my brother scrambling behind me, and when I risked a look back, I saw him clear the fence in one bound, even though he was wearing jeans and a jacket that should have slowed him down. Adrenaline must have taken over because he leaped over it like it was nothing. As he landed, he let out a gasp, and I followed his gaze. The thing was standing now, fully upright, and it was even taller than I'd thought, easily over 7 feet with broad shoulders and arms that hung low. It didn't make a sound, but its presence was overwhelming, like a wave of dread washing over us. We both took off running, not looking back again. The path home was about a quarter mile through open fields, and we sprinted like our lives depended on it. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't slow down. I could hear my brother's ragged breathing beside me, and once or twice I thought I heard heavy footsteps behind us, but I didn't dare turn around. The whole way, my mind was racing. What was that thing? Was it following us? I kept expecting to feel a hand grab my shoulder or hear a roar, but nothing came. The only sounds were our pounding feet and the wind whistling past our ears. The sky was getting darker, with streaks of orange and purple, but it felt like night was falling too fast. When we finally reached the house, we burst through the back door, both of us crying and gasping for air. Our aunt was in the kitchen and she rushed over, her face pale as she saw our state. We were trembling so hard we could barely speak, and I remember my hands shaking as I tried to explain what happened. We stumbled over our words, telling her about the figure in the woods, the eyes, the way it stood up. She listened quietly, her expression serious, and then she shared something that made my blood run cold. She said that over the years, other people in the area had seen similar things, big, hairy creatures in the woods, mostly at dusk or dawn. She even told us about a local story of a man who went missing decades ago near that same stream. They never found him, and some folks whispered that he'd encountered something he shouldn't have. Hearing that from her, someone who wasn't prone to exaggeration, made it all feel even more real and terrifying. We stayed inside for the rest of the night, huddled together, jumping at every creak and noise. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black eyes staring back at me. The fear didn't fade. It settled deep, like a chill that never quite goes away. Even now, years later, I'm cautious when I'm out in the woods, especially near dusk. I never go alone, and I always keep an eye on the shadows. Whatever we saw that day, it wasn't just some animal or a trick of the light. It was something else, something that felt ancient and aware, and to this day I have no explanation for it. Just this gut-wrenching fear that lingers, like a scar that never fully heals. Story 3. Okay, so this happened back in the spring of 1966. I've never really talked about it much because, honestly, who would believe me? But I've been reading some of the stories on here and it feels like maybe I'm not alone, so I'm just going to type it out, exactly how I remember it. It's one of those things that stuck with me all these years, and even now, thinking about it makes my hands a little shaky. My husband and I were living in Bigfoot County, South Carolina at the time. We were young, married only a couple of years, and we loved taking these little nighttime drives. Nothing fancy, just getting out of the house, maybe parking somewhere quiet to talk or just watch the stars. That night, we decided to head down to the South Pier. It wasn't a fancy place, just the old wooden pier jutting out into the water with a dirt parking area and woods all around. The kind of spot where you could hear the water lapping and the crickets chirping, and not much else. It was a cool spring evening, not cold, but with that damp chill that seeps into your bones if you sit still too long. I remember I was wearing this light jacket, and my husband had on his work jeans and a flannel shirt. We'd packed a couple of sandwiches and some coffee in a thermos, nothing special. We drove there in our beat-up pickup truck, the one he used for work. The seats were worn, and there was always this smell of oil and dirt, but it was ours. We parked near the end of the pier, facing the water. The moon was out, almost full, casting this silvery light over everything. It was beautiful in a lonely kind of way. We sat there for a while, just talking about nothing, work, maybe buying a house someday, the usual stuff. I remember feeling really content, like life was simple and good. Then I noticed something moving out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just a deer or maybe a dog. We'd see animals out there sometimes, but this was different. It was behind this big rock off to the left of the pier, maybe 50 feet away. The rock was about the size of a small car, all jagged and covered in moss. I nudged my husband and pointed. "Hey, do you see that?" I whispered, though I don't know why I was whispering. He leaned forward, squinting. The moonlight was bright enough that we could make out shapes, but not details. Then it stepped out from behind the rock, and my breath just caught in my throat. It was hunched over like an ape, but bigger than any person I'd ever seen. Its arms were long, and it swung them as it moved, kind of loping along. It wasn't walking on all fours, but it wasn't upright like a human either. More like it was halfway between, with this stooped posture that made it look heavy and powerful. I could feel my heart starting to pound. It was the kind of fear that hits you deep in your gut, the kind that makes your skin go cold. My husband must have felt it too, because he grabbed my arm, his fingers tight. "What the hell is that?" he said, his voice low and tense. We both stared, not moving, not even breathing hard. The creature was moving slowly, kind of shuffling toward the woods. But then it stopped and turned its head in our direction. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was too dark. But I got the sense it was looking right at us. There was something intelligent about the way it moved, not like a dumb animal. It had this presence, this weight to it that felt wrong. My husband is usually the calm one, but I could see the panic in his eyes. He didn't say anything else, just reached for the keys still in the ignition. The truck was old, and the headlights were these big round things that took a second to warm up. He turned them on, and for a split second, nothing happened. Then the beams cut through the darkness, lighting up the area around the rock. The creature froze. I mean, it just stopped dead in its tracks. The light caught it full on, and I got a better look. It was covered in dark, matted hair, almost black, and it was huge, taller than a man, but bent over so it seemed shorter. Its arms were thick, swinging loosely, and I could see muscles bunching under the fur. But the worst part was how fast it moved when the lights hit it. It didn't just startle, it jerked like it had been shocked, and then it let out this sound, not a roar, but this deep, guttural grunt that I felt in my chest. Then it advanced on us, not slowly anymore, but with this incredible speed. It was coming right toward the truck, and I swear my heart felt like it was going to explode. I remember grabbing the door handle, my knuckles white, thinking we should run. But we were in the truck and the doors were locked. Stupid, I know, but in that moment, it felt like the only safe place. It moved so fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. Its legs were powerful, and it covered the ground in these long, bounding strides. The way it swung its arms helped it balance, like it was built for speed. It wasn't running like a human. It was more like a gallop, but on two legs, with this hunched-over posture that made it look even more terrifying. I could hear its feet hitting the ground, this heavy thumping sound that echoed in the quiet night. My husband was fumbling with the gear shift, trying to get the truck in reverse, but his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't get it right. I was just frozen, watching this thing get closer and closer. Its eyes, I couldn't see them clearly, but in the headlights, they seemed to reflect the light, like an animal's. That's when the real terror set in. This wasn't some prank or a bear. This was something else, something that shouldn't be here. It got within maybe 20 feet of the truck, and I could smell it. This musky, earthy odor, like wet dirt and something rotten. It filled the cab, and I almost gagged. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it veered off and headed for the woods. It didn't slow down, it just changed direction and vanished into the trees. 1 second it was there, a massive dark shape barreling toward us, and the next, it was gone, swallowed up by the forest. We sat there for what felt like forever, not saying a word. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the engine still running. My husband finally got the truck in gear, and we backed out of there so fast we almost hit a tree. We didn't stop until we were back on the main road, miles away. The whole drive home, neither of us spoke. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see it following us, but there was nothing. When we got back to our house, we just sat in the driveway for a few minutes, still shaking. Finally, my husband turned to me and said, "You saw that, right?" "I'm not crazy." His voice was rough, like he'd been screaming, but he hadn't made a sound the whole time. I nodded, too choked up to speak. We went inside and locked all the doors, even though it felt pointless. We didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump. I kept replaying it in my head. The way it moved, the sound it made, the smell. It was all so vivid, like it was burned into my brain. The next day we talked about it more. We both agreed it ran faster than any human could, and it wasn't a bear or anything else we knew. We thought about reporting it, but back then, who would have taken us seriously? We were just a couple of kids from the county, so we kept it to ourselves. And over the years we'd mention it sometimes, but always in that hushed tone, like it was a secret. Even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and see it clear as day. That hunched shape in the moonlight, the way it advanced on us, and then just disappeared. I've never been back to the South Pier, and I don't think I ever will. Some things you just can't explain, and this is one of them. It's like a piece of my life that doesn't fit, and I guess it never will. Story 4. It was one of those early April mornings in 1994 where the air still had that winter bite to it, but the sun felt warm on your face if you stood in it long enough. My son, he was 7 years old then, had been pestering me for weeks to go fishing, just the two of us, a real adventure. His mom, my wife, she was happy to have a quiet house for a day, so I packed up the old Ford pickup on a Saturday, threw our rods and a tackle box in the back, and we set off before the sun was even properly up. We lived in Monroe, Washington, and our plan was to head up into the mountains north of Gold Bar. I'd heard from a guy at work about this lake. Didn't even have a real name on the map, just a blue splotch you had to know how to find. He said it was loaded with trout, untouched. Sounded perfect. My boy was bouncing in his seat the whole way, his little legs kicking the underside of the glove box, talking a mile a minute about the monster fish he was going to catch. The drive itself was part of the adventure. We left the highway and the pavement turned to gravel, then to a rough logging road that climbed and twisted up into the foothills of the Cascades. The trees closed in around us, that deep, dark green of Pacific Northwest forest. It was beautiful, but even then, in the daylight, there was a stillness to it that felt heavy. Our dog, Buster, a brown and white mutt of indeterminate origin, was with us in the cab. He usually loved car rides, his head out the window, tongue flapping, but as we got deeper in, he got quiet, just sitting on the seat between me and my son, watching the trees go by. We found the turnoff my co-worker had scribbled on a napkin, a track so overgrown I almost missed it. The truck bounced and lurched down it for what felt like forever, branches scraping against the sides. I remember thinking if we got a flat tire out here, we were in for a long, long walk. Finally, the trees opened up, and there it was. The lake. It was smaller than I'd pictured, a dark, mirror-still sheet of water surrounded by dense forest right up to its banks. It was so quiet. No birds, no wind rustling the leaves. Just this profound, unnerving silence. We got out of the truck, the crunch of our boots on the gravel seeming way too loud. I unpacked our gear. I remember the specific, familiar weight of my old fishing vest as I put it on, the clatter of the lures in the metal tackle box. My son was already at the water's edge, skipping stones. Buster, though, he didn't run off like he usually would. He stayed right by my heels, his body tense, his nose working the air. We found a good spot on a little pebble beach, a fallen log we could sit on. I got my son's line set up, a little hook with a worm, and showed him how to cast. He was so focused, his little brow furrowed in concentration. I set up my own rod, and for a little while it was perfect. Just a father and his son, fishing. The silence started to feel peaceful instead of weird. We didn't get a single bite, but it didn't matter. We were just happy to be there. That's when the smell hit me. It's hard to describe. Even now, it wasn't just a dead animal. It was thick. A mix of rotting meat and something else. Something foul and musky, like a wet dog that had been rolling in garbage and then left in a closed-up shed for a month. It was so strong, it made my eyes water and my stomach turn over. I actually gagged, covering my nose and mouth with my hand. "Dad, what's that smell?" my son asked, his face all scrunched up. Before I could answer, Buster let out this low whine, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It was pure fear. The hair on his back stood straight up, and he started backing away from the woods, his tail tucked so far between his legs it was practically invisible. Then he turned and bolted, scrambling up the bank and diving under the truck. He was shaking so hard I could see the whole truck bed vibrating slightly. The silence was gone, replaced by this new, awful tension. The smell was everywhere, clinging to the inside of my nostrils. My heart started beating a little faster. I stood up from the log, my fishing rod forgotten in my hand. "Probably just a dead deer or something, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But I didn't believe it. A dead deer doesn't smell like that, and it sure as hell doesn't scare a dog that badly. I took a few steps away from the water, peering into the wall of trees. The undergrowth was thick, a tangle of ferns and salal bushes and fallen branches. The light was dim, filtered through the dense canopy. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows and more green. Then I saw movement. It was about 30, maybe 35 yards away, deep in the trees. It was big, not bare big, bigger. It was crouched down, its back to me, and it was moving. There was a rhythm to it, a hunching, tearing motion. My brain, trying to make sense of it, first said, "Elk." But it was the wrong shape, and it was covered in hair, but not like an elk's coat. This was long, shaggy and matted, a dark brownish-red color, almost black in the shadows. It was tearing into something on the ground, a carcass. I could see the white of bone, the dark red of meat. The smell was coming from there, from it. I felt a cold dread wash over me, starting at the base of my skull and running down my spine. This was wrong. This was all wrong. "Dad?" my son whispered from behind me. "What is it?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the spot. I just stared, my eyes trying to process the sheer size of the thing. Its shoulders were massive, hunched and powerful. The arms, they were too long. They moved with a purpose that wasn't animal, but it wasn't human either. It was something in between, and then it stopped. It froze mid-tier. Its head, which had been bent down to its work, lifted slightly. It had heard us, or smelled us. I don't know. I stopped breathing. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. Slowly, so slowly, it began to turn its head. It looked over its shoulder. I saw its profile, a heavy, sloping brow, a flattened nose, and then it turned the rest of the way, its body shifting as it rose from its crouch. It stood up. My mind just broke for a second. It uncoiled to a height that was staggering. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was built like a power lifter, thick through the chest and legs, covered in that same matted, filthy hair. It was standing on 2 legs, fully upright, just like a man. But it wasn't a man. It was a monster from a nightmare, standing right there in the Washington woods. Its eyes. I'll never forget its eyes. They weren't animal eyes, not like a bear's or a deer's. They were intelligent. They were a deep, dark brown, almost black, and they held a light in them, a sharp, aware, predatory light. They locked onto mine. There was no confusion in that look. It saw me. It saw my son. It knew exactly what we were. That's when my son started to cry. Not a loud wail, but a terrified, hitching sob. He clutched the leg of my jeans, burying his face against me. "Daddy," he whimpered, his voice trembling with pure fear. "Its eyes, Daddy. I don't like its eyes." That broke the spell. The sound of his terror snapped me out of my frozen state. Adrenaline flooded my system, a cold, sharp shock. "Run!" I breathed. Then I yelled it. "Run!" I dropped my fishing rod. The expensive reel be damned. I grabbed my son, scooping him up under one arm like a football. He was dead weight, paralyzed with fear. I spun around and started sprinting for the truck. My legs felt like rubber, my boots slipping on the loose stones of the beach. Every nerve in my body was screaming, expecting to feel a massive hand clamp down on my shoulder, to feel myself being dragged back into those dark woods. I risked one glance back. It was still standing there, just watching us. It hadn't moved. It just stood. A massive, dark sentinel at the edge of the trees, its eyes fixed on our fleeing forms. That was almost worse than if it had chased us. The calmness of it. I fumbled with the truck door, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. I yanked it open, shoved my son across the bench seat, and practically dove in after him. I slammed the door shut, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness. I was gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. My son was sobbing now, curled into a ball on the seat. Buster was whining and trembling under the dashboard. I fumbled for the keys, my vision blurry with panic. I got them in the ignition, turned. The engine roared to life. That's when the sound started. It began as a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very metal of the truck. Then it rose, sharpened, into a scream. It wasn't a roar, not like a bear or a lion. This was a scream, a high, piercing, ululating shriek that was horrifyingly intelligent. It was the sound of pure rage, of a warning of something ancient and terrible. It echoed off the hills and the surface of the lake, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was so loud, so piercing, it felt like it was inside my skull. I froze. My foot, which had been about to stomp on the gas, just hovered over the pedal. I was paralyzed again, my body refusing to listen to my brain, which was shrieking at me to go, go, go. I was just stuck, staring out the windshield, listening to that ungodly sound shred the air. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few seconds. The scream died away, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow even more terrifying. I finally slammed my foot down on the gas. The tires spun, kicking up gravel and mud, and the truck shot forward, lurching back up the overgrown track. Branches screeched and scraped along the sides, but I didn't care. I just drove, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We bounced onto the main logging road, and I kept my speed up, the truck fishtailing on the loose surface. After a minute, maybe two, the road curved, giving us a last, fleeting view of the lake valley down below. My eyes, against my will, were drawn to the ridgeline above the spot where we'd been. It was there, standing on the crest of the ridge, silhouetted against the grey April sky. It was just watching us flee. It was so far away, but I could still feel its gaze, those dark, intelligent eyes following the truck. It stood there, perfectly still, a massive, impossible shape against the horizon. Then, as the road curved again and the trees swallowed the view, it was gone. The drive home was a blur. My son cried himself to sleep, exhausted from the terror. Buster eventually crept out from under the dashboard and sat pressed against my leg, shivering. I drove in a cold sweat, my body trembling, my mind just replaying it over and over. The smell, the size of it, the way it stood up, its eyes, my son's voice. I don't like its eyes. The scream that froze me solid. We never went back. Not to that lake, not to any lake in those mountains. I sold my fishing gear that summer. My son, he's a grown man now, and we've never really talked about it. Not in detail. It's just a thing that happened, a dark spot in our past. But sometimes, on a quiet night, if the wind is just right, I think I can still smell that foul, musky stench, and I can still hear that scream echoing in my head, and I see it standing on that ridge, just watching, making sure we were gone. I can't explain it, I don't try to, it just is, and it haunts me. Story 5. All right, I'm just gonna dive right into this because it's been eating at me for years and I need to get it off my chest. I live way out in northern Ferry County, Washington, like middle of nowhere kind of place, where the trees are thick and the silence can be deafening. This happened back in February of 2008, on a day that started out normal, but ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about the woods around here. I've had a few weird run-ins before, but this one was different. It's the day that solidified it all for me, and I still get chills thinking about it. That morning, I woke up early around 6 o'clock because the sun was just starting to peek through the curtains. It was one of those cold, crisp winter days where the air feels sharp in your lungs and everything outside is covered in a layer of snow that crunches under your boots. I'd been planning to hike up Mount Leona for a while, just to clear my head, you know? Life had been stressful, and sometimes the best way to deal with it is to lose yourself in the wilderness for a bit. I threw on my warmest clothes, thick jeans, a thermal shirt, and my old jacket that'd seen better days. Laced up my size 13 boots, grabbed my backpack with some water, snacks, and a basic first aid kit, and headed out the door. The drive to the trailhead was quiet. My truck's heater was struggling to keep up, and I could see my breath fogging up the windshield a little. I live alone, so there was no one to say goodbye to, which made the whole thing feel even more solitary. As I drove, my mind wandered back to the first time I ever heard something strange out here. That was in March of 2005, I think. I was outside my house, just messing around in the yard, when I heard this low, moaning growl coming from a hill nearby. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a cougar, nothing. It was deep, almost guttural, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I remember telling my dad about it later, and he just shrugged and said, "Sounds like a Sasquatch." He was half joking, but the way he said it made me wonder. He's lived here his whole life and has stories of his own, so I didn't brush it off completely. Then, fast forward to earlier in February of 2008, just a couple weeks before this hike. I was out walking near my property after a fresh snowfall and came across these huge footprints in the snow. I mean, massive. I wear size 13 boots, and these were way bigger, like several inches longer and wider. The stride between them was insane too. I measured it roughly, and it was about 4 or 5 feet from one print to the next. Whatever made them was taking huge steps, like it was in a hurry or just built that way. Later that same day, I was driving home and heard that same low moan growl again. I pulled over and sat there for 4 or 5 minutes just listening, but it didn't come back. It left me feeling uneasy, like I was being watched. So that's where my head was at when I pulled into the parking area at the base of Mount Leona. The snow was deeper up here, maybe a foot or so, and the trees were so dense that the sunlight barely broke through. I remember the silence hitting me first. It was so absolute that it almost felt heavy. I got out of the truck, slung my backpack over my shoulders, and started up the trail. The crunch of snow under my boots was the only sound for a long time, and I found myself listening for anything else, my ears straining against the quiet. The hike started off fine. I was making good time, my breath puffing out in little clouds and my body warming up from the exertion. The trail winds through a mix of pine and fir trees, with the occasional rocky outcrop where you can stop and look out over the valley. I'd been up here a few times before, so I knew the general layout, but today it felt different. Maybe it was the cold or the memory of those footprints, but I was on edge. Every little noise, a branch cracking, the wind rustling the leaves, made me jump. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but that feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. After about an hour of hiking, I reached a spot where the trail opens up into a small clearing. I decided to take a break here, have some water, and just soak in the view. That's when I first heard it, a series of whoop calls coming from a ridge above me. They weren't loud, but they were distinct, deep, resonant whoops that echoed through the trees. I froze, my water bottle halfway to my mouth, and listened. They sounded like they were coming from multiple directions, like there was more than one thing up there communicating. My heart started pounding right away, thumping against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't like the moan growl from before. This was more organized, almost conversational. I'd read enough online accounts and heard enough stories to know that whoop calls are often associated with Bigfoot, but hearing them in person was something else entirely. It was eerie, but part of me was curious too. I mean, what if it was just some animal I hadn't encountered before? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sounds were too intelligent, too purposeful. I stood there for what felt like forever, just listening, and the whoops kept going, back and forth between the ridges. It was like they were talking to each other, and I was the outsider eavesdropping. My curiosity got the better of me. I know it was stupid, but I decided to mimic one of the calls. I'd heard that sometimes they respond if you try to communicate, and I guess I wanted to see if that was true. I took a deep breath, cupped my hands around my mouth, and let out a whoop that was as close as I could get to what I'd heard. It felt awkward, like I was pretending to be something I wasn't, and my voice sounded thin and weak compared to the deep tones from the ridge. For a second, nothing happened. The woods went dead silent, like everything had stopped to listen. Then, out of nowhere, there was this huge crack from a tree right above me. I mean, it was loud, like a gunshot or something snapping in half. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. There was nothing visible, no animal, no falling branch, but the sound came from directly overhead, like whatever it was had been waiting there the whole time. It felt like a warning, like I'd crossed some line and it was telling me to back off. The fear hit me all at once. My legs felt weak and I started shaking so bad I had to lean against a tree to steady myself. My mind was racing. What if it was right above me? What if it was huge and I couldn't see it? The tree was a big fir, thick with branches, and I couldn't spot anything moving, but that just made it worse. It was like something was hiding, watching me, and that crack was its way of saying, "I'm here and you're not welcome." I didn't wait around to find out more. I shoved my water bottle back into my backpack, my hands fumbling because they were trembling so much, and I started hurrying back down the trail. I wasn't running, my legs were too shaky for that, but I was moving as fast as I could without tripping over roots or rocks hidden under the snow. Every few steps, I'd glance back over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me, but there was nothing, just the silent snow-covered trees and that eerie feeling of eyes on my back. The whole way down, my heart didn't slow down. I was sweating despite the cold, and my breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. I kept replaying that crack in my head, how sudden it was, how it seemed to come from nowhere. It wasn't like a tree falling naturally, it was too sharp, too focused, like something big had broken a branch on purpose. I remembered the footprints from earlier, the huge stride, and it all clicked into place. Whatever was out there, it was real, and it knew I was there. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the parking area. I fumbled with my keys, my hands still shaking, and practically threw myself into the driver's seat. I locked the doors immediately, like that would make a difference, and just sat there for a minute, trying to catch my breath. The woods that had once felt peaceful now seemed menacing, like they were hiding secrets I wasn't meant to know. I drove home in a daze, my mind buzzing with what had happened. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise outside made me jump, and I kept thinking about that crack and the whoop calls. It wasn't just fear, it was awe too. I'd always been skeptical about Bigfoot stories, but after that day, I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was out there, something intelligent and powerful, and it had made sure I knew it. To this day, I haven't gone back to Mount Leona. I'm more cautious now when I'm out in the woods, always listening, always watching. That experience left me with a mix of fear and respect for whatever these creatures are. I don't have all the answers, and I probably never will, but I know what I heard and felt that day. It stuck with me, like a shadow I can't shake, and every time I think about it, I get that same chill down my spine. Whatever it was, it changed how I see the world. And I'll never forget the sound of that tree cracking above me, as if something was waiting and warning me to stay away. Story 6. Okay, I'll try to write this. I've never really written it all down before, and just thinking about it again makes my hands feel a little shaky. But here goes. My name is Shannon Morgan. This all happened during my freshman year of high school. I had to take the bus. But it didn't go all the way to my house, just to this main road a couple miles away. Every single school day, I'd get dropped off at this same spot, right where the pavement turned to gravel, and I'd have to walk the rest of the way home. It was about a 25-minute walk if I didn't dawdle. The road was pretty much just ours and one other neighbor's driveway further down, so it was quiet. On my left was just open fields, mostly fallow that year, and on my right was this steep wooded hill, not a mountain or anything, just a big, thickly forested hill that went up sharply from the roadside. The walk was boring at first, just something you did. I'd kick rocks, listen to my Discman until the batteries got low, stuff like that. It was probably October when I first noticed it. The leaves had started to turn and fall, so the woods were a bit more open, a bit noisier underfoot with all the dry leaves. I was walking, just minding my own business, and I heard a crunch, not from my feet, from up on the hill. I stopped, looked up. Nothing. I figured it was a deer, they were everywhere. I started walking again, and then I heard it again. Crunch, step, crunch. It was keeping pace with me. I remember my heart did this little jump, but I brushed it off. Definitely a deer. I tried to walk faster. The sound from the hill matched my pace, step for step. I slowed down. It slowed down. I stopped dead. It stopped. The silence that followed was somehow louder and heavier than the sound had been. It felt like the whole woods was holding its breath. I stood there for a full minute just listening, my ears straining. Nothing, just the wind. I started walking again, and instantly the parallel steps started up again. That was the first day, and it became the pattern. Every single day after that, from the moment I passed this specific big oak tree that marked the start of my side of the woods, the steps would begin, and they would follow me, step for step, all the way until I reached this old rusted mailbox on a post that was basically my finish line. The edge of our property. The steps would just stop, like they'd hit an invisible wall. It was the consistency that got to me. It wasn't a one-off creepy thing. It was a scheduled, daily haunting. I started dreading that walk. My stomach would be in knots from lunchtime onward. Getting off the bus felt like walking onto a stage for a performance I never auditioned for. A couple of times, friends came over after school. I never said anything at first. I was too worried they'd think I was crazy. But on the walk, their chatter would die down. They'd get quiet. One of them, Sarah, finally said, "Do you guys hear that?" She pointed up at the hill. "It sounds like someone's walking up there with us." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just me. I felt this weird mix of relief and utter terror. Relief that I wasn't imagining it, and terror because that meant it was real. They laughed it off, said it was probably just an echo or a big animal, but I saw the look on their faces. They were spooked too. They just had the luxury of leaving and never thinking about it again. I didn't. I tried to see it, of course I tried. I'd stop and stare into the woods, but the hill was steep and the trees were thick. It was all shadows and tangled brush. I'd catch glimpses, just flashes, a flicker of movement like a branch springing back into place. Once, I saw a patch of light brown fur, not the grey-brown of a deer, but a warmer, almost tan color behind a thicket of brambles. It was there for a second and then gone. Another time, I saw the ferns shaking in a way that didn't match the wind, like something big and solid was moving through them. The feeling of being stalked is a physical thing. It's not just in your head. Your skin prickles. The fine hairs on your arms and the back of your neck stand up. You get this cold spot right between your shoulder blades, like a target has been painted there. My hearing became hypersensitive. I could pick out the sound of its footsteps from the rustle of leaves and the chirping of birds. It had a weight to it, a heavy, deliberate thump with each step. I finally broke down and told my dad. He's a practical man, a mechanic. If he can't see it or fix it, it's not a real problem. He humored me. He walked the route with me a few times, his big work boots crunching on the gravel. Of course, nothing happened. The woods were silent. It was like the thing knew he was there, knew he was a threat. He poked around the base of the hill for a minute, saw nothing but deer scat and rabbit tracks. "See, Shannon," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "It's just the woods making noises. Your imagination runs away with you when you're alone out here." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. Later, I overheard him talking to Mr. Anderson, our neighbor who farmed the fields on the other side of the road. My dad was laughing it off, but Mr. Anderson wasn't laughing. He said he'd found footprints in the mud down by his creek that were too big for a man and deep, like whatever made them was heavy. He said he'd heard whooping sounds at night that didn't sound like any coyote he'd ever heard. My dad just shrugged and said it was probably kids or a bear passing through. The winter was both better and worse. Better because the snow muffled everything, and sometimes I couldn't hear the steps, just see the occasional puff of snow dislodged from a branch high up on the hill. Worse because the not knowing, the not hearing, was its own kind of torture. The presence was still there. I could feel it. Then spring came, the snow melted, turning the gravel road to mud. The woods came back to life, but the feeling of being watched came back with it, stronger than ever. It was a warm day in late April, I think. The kind of day that should feel good, but I was just filled with this low-grade dread. I'd had enough. I was tired of being scared. On that day, I didn't go straight home. I had this old spotting scope my grandpa had given me for birdwatching. It was clunky, but it worked. Instead of walking down the road, I cut across the field and climbed up onto the old railroad tracks that ran along the ridge above our property. From up there, you could look down across the road and into the wooded hill. It was a different perspective. I was looking across at it, instead of up. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was stupid. This was so stupid. What was I going to do if I actually saw something? I crouched down behind a rotting railroad tie, the smell of creosote and damp wood filling my nose. I fumbled the spotting scope out of my backpack. My hands were so sweaty and clumsy. I scanned the tree line. It was just a jumble of green and brown at first. I focused, breathing slowly, trying to steady the view. I panned along, following the path I would normally be walking down below. I saw the big oak tree. I saw the thicket of brambles. I saw the rusted mailbox in the distance, and then I saw it movement. Not the flicker of a bird or the scamper of a squirrel, a large, solid movement. I twisted the focus knob, my thumb slipping. The image sharpened. It was a figure. It was standing partly behind a big pine tree, but it was tall, really tall. I'd say at least 6 feet, but it seemed bigger because of its shoulders. They were massive, rounded and powerful looking. Its arms were long, like unnaturally long. They hung down past its knees. It was covered in hair, a light brown, almost reddish tan color, just like the patch I'd seen months before. It wasn't bulky like a bear. It was built like a person, but a huge, powerful, stretched-out person. It was turned slightly away from me, looking down the hill towards the road, towards where I would be. It was watching the road, waiting. I stopped breathing. The whole world narrowed to that circle of glass. I could see the musculature under the fur, the way its shoulders moved as it took a slow, deliberate step forward. It wasn't just walking. It was patrolling. Then, as if it had heard my heart thudding from across the gully, it turned its head. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was in shadow and the distance was still too great, but I got an impression of a heavy brow, a flat nose. It didn't look human. It didn't look like any animal I knew. It took another step, and with one of those long, long arms, it reached out and pushed a branch of a young sapling aside. It didn't snap it or break it. It just moved it, like you or I would push aside a curtain, with a casual, easy strength. The branch swung back into place, quivering, and then it moved. It didn't run. It loped. It took these huge, ground-eating strides, heading up and over the ridge, away from me. It moved through the thick underbrush like it wasn't even there, silent and incredibly fast. In 3-4 strides, it had vanished over the crest of the hill. Gone. I lowered the scope. I was trembling all over, a full-body shake that I couldn't control. My teeth were chattering. I sat there on the railroad ties for I don't know how long, just staring at the empty spot where it had been. The air felt thin, like I couldn't get enough of it into my lungs. I finally scrambled down, my legs like jelly, and ran all the way home. I burst through the door, panting, my face probably white as a sheet. I told my dad what I saw, stumbling over my words, my voice too high. I described the height, the shoulders, the arms, the way it moved the brush aside. He listened, his face getting more and more serious. But when I finished, he just sighed. He put his hands on my shoulders, looked me right in the eye. "Shannon," he said, his voice firm, "listen to me. It was probably just some guy in a ghillie suit, a hunter, or some kid playing a prank. You can't be going up there looking for trouble. You hear me? You stay away from those woods. Don't go looking for it. A prankster, a guy in a suit." He said it with such finality, such certainty, that for a second I almost believed him. Maybe it was easier to believe that, but then I remembered the way it moved, the effortless fluid power, the sheer size of it, the way its arms swung. No man could move like that. No suit could look that integrated. I never saw it again after that. I started getting rides all the way home from a friend's mom after that, making up excuses. I couldn't face that walk anymore. The fear had a shape now, a height, a color. It was real. But my dad's dismissal stuck with me. It created this wall. I had seen something that defied explanation, something that stalked me for months, and the only official answer was to ignore it, to pretend it was nothing. So I buried it. I never spoke about it again, until now. And sometimes, on a quiet night when the wind is right, I'll look out my window towards that dark, wooded hill, and I'll wonder if it's still out there. And I'll remember the way it pushed that branch aside, like it was nothing at all, and I'll feel that same cold spot between my shoulder blades. Story 7. It was February of 1983. I was young then, fit, thought I was tough as nails. I was with the Canadian Armed Forces, part of a special operations unit. We were up in Padawa, Ontario, for a winter survival exercise. The kind of training that's meant to break you down and build you back up. Let me tell you, the breaking down part was working just fine. The cold. God, the cold. You hear -30 degrees and you think you understand it, but you don't. It's a different kind of beast. It's not just the number. It's the wind that comes with it. A wind that doesn't blow, but instead claws at any exposed skin, sucking the heat right out of your bones. Your breath freezes in your mustache. Your eyelashes stick together if you blink too slow. The snow doesn't crunch. It squeaks under your boots. A high-pitched sound that feels wrong. We were a team of 15 guys set up on this big, flat mountain plateau. It was maybe 2-3 clicks from a place called El Ganquin Park. Our camp was just a bunch of Arctic tents, huddled together like they were trying to keep each other warm. The landscape was stark, just white and black and grey. White snow, black tree lines in the distance, grey sky even during the day. At night it was just nothing. A deep, swallowing darkness. My shift for night patrol started at 2 in the morning. I remember pulling on my layers, my fingers already stiff and clumsy even inside the tent. We had these big, bulky white parkas and thick pants, but the cold always found a way in. My rifle was with me, a standard issue C7. For the exercise it was unloaded. No live ammo. It was just a heavy, cold piece of metal and plastic, more for the feel of it than anything else. My flashlight was a piece of junk, the kind that throws a weak, yellowy circle of light that just makes the darkness around it seem thicker. I stepped out of the tent, and the wind hit me like a physical wall. It stole my breath for a second. I started my loop, a slow, plodding walk around the perimeter of our camp. My job was to look and listen, Mostly you just listened to the wind howl and the creak of trees weighed down with ice. It was monotonous. Your mind starts to play tricks. You see shadows move. You hear things in the wind. But this was different. I was maybe 20 minutes into my patrol, facing the tree line to the east. The wind was blowing towards me, which is important. It means anything downwind would have a hard time hearing me, but I'd hear them just fine. At first, I thought it was the wind, a weird whistling, moaning sound. I stopped, turned my head, trying to place it. I clicked off my flashlight, standing there in the utter blackness, just listening. That's when I heard it clearly. It wasn't the wind. It was voices. They were coming from the tree line, maybe 150, 200 meters out. Far enough that they were faint, but close enough that I could tell they were voices, human voices, but they weren't speaking English or French. It didn't sound like any language I knew. The best way I can describe it is, it sounded like dialogue from one of those old Japanese samurai movies. You know, the ones where the actors are speaking Japanese, all guttural and sharp, with those rising and falling tones. It was a conversation. I'm sure of it. It wasn't just one voice, it was two, maybe three. One would make a series of sounds, a string of gibberish to my ears, and then there would be a pause, and then another would answer, back and forth, like an argument or a discussion. My first thought wasn't fear, it was pure confusion. What the hell were people doing out here, in the middle of the night? In this godforsaken cold, we were in the middle of nowhere. The closest proper town was miles away. Hunters wouldn't be out here in February, at 2:30 in the morning, and if they were, why would they be speaking Japanese? I stood there, frozen in place, and I listened. It went on and on, for what felt like forever. I checked my watch. It was probably closer to 25, 30 minutes. The whole time, this bizarre foreign chatter continued, ebbing and flowing with the gusts of wind. It never got louder, never got closer, but it never went away either. That's when the unease started to curdle into something else. This was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. My training kicked in, the part that overrides the creeping fear in your gut. I switched my flashlight back on, pointing the pathetic beam towards the trees. I couldn't see a damn thing, just the black silhouettes of pines and the swirling snow in my light. I cupped my hands around my mouth, my mittens muffling the sound a bit, and I shouted into the darkness. "Hello, identify yourself." My voice sounded small and thin, swallowed by the immensity of the night. The voices stopped for a second, just for a heartbeat. Then they started up again, completely ignoring me. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't right. I tried again, louder this time, putting some authority into it. "This is a military training area. Identify yourself now." Nothing. No change. The samurai movie dialogue just continued, oblivious. It was like I wasn't even there. Who the hell hears a soldier yelling at them from the darkness and just keeps talking? Nobody. Unless they couldn't hear me, or unless they didn't care. The fear was real now. A live wire running up my spine. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was a threat. My mind was racing through possibilities. Spies, that seemed ridiculous. Delirious hikers, in this weather? They'd be dead. My brain kept rejecting every logical explanation. There wasn't one. I looked down at my rifle. It was unloaded, useless. But I had a bayonet in my webbing. It was standard kit for the exercise, more for utility than combat. Without really thinking, my hands moving on autopilot, I unclipped it from my gear. My fingers were so cold I could barely feel the metal, but I managed to fix it to the lug under the barrel of my rifle. It snicked into place. The long, cruel-looking blade caught a glint of stray light. It felt different now. The rifle felt heavier, more substantial. It was no longer just a prop. It was a weapon, primitive as it was. I took a deep breath, the air like shards of glass in my lungs. I leveled the rifle, bayonet pointing towards the sound, and I put every ounce of air I had into my lungs. I didn't shout words this time. I roared. It was a raw, guttural animal sound, a challenge, a final warning. It was the sound of my own terror and anger boiled together and unleashed into the night. The effect was instantaneous. The voices stopped, not faded, not trailed off. They were cut off mid-syllable, as if someone had thrown a switch. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was 1,000 times worse than the sounds. The wind was still there, whipping snow around me, but it was just background noise now. The real sound, the one that had filled the last half hour, was gone, and its absence was heavy. It was a physical pressure on my eardrums. It felt attentive, like the darkness itself was now holding its breath, listening to me. A chill, completely separate from the Arctic air, went straight down my back. My skin prickled all over. Every hair on my body was standing up. I stood there, bayonet fixed, rifle held ready, staring into a blackness that felt alive. I was straining my ears, trying to hear anything. A footstep, a rustle, a breath. Nothing. Just that awful waiting silence. I don't know how long I stood like that. It could have been 2 minutes or 10. Time got weird. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, the steam pluming out in front of my face. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Slowly, painfully slowly, I lowered my rifle. My arms were shaking. I didn't know what to do. My training hadn't covered this. It hadn't covered voices in the woods that vanish when you scream at them with a bayonet. I had to finish my patrol. That was my job. So I started walking again. But it wasn't the same. Before, I was just cold and bored. Now, I was terrified. Every shadow was a threat. Every creak of a tree was something moving. I kept my back to the camp, my eyes glued on that tree line, walking backwards half the time. My neck was so tense it ached. I held the rifle so tight my knuckles hurt, the bayonet a cold comfort. The rest of the patrol was a blur of sheer, unadulterated fear. I was a trained soldier, but in that moment, I was just a scared kid in the dark, feeling like I was being watched by something I couldn't see, something that had been having a conversation I couldn't understand until I'd threatened it. Finally, my shift ended. 4 in the morning, I stumbled back into the tent to wake up my replacement. He was just a lump in his sleeping bag. I shook him awake. "Your turn," I said, and my voice was hoarse. He grumbled, started getting his gear on. He looked at me, squinting in the low light. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I just shook my head. "Just cold," I mumbled. I couldn't tell him. He'd have laughed, or he'd have thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I crawled into my own sleeping bag, still in most of my clothes, my rifle right beside me. I didn't sleep, I just lay there, shaking, listening to the wind, expecting to hear those voices start up again right outside the tent wall. They never did. The next day we packed up and moved out. The sun came up, weak and pale, and the world looked normal again. Just snow and trees. I didn't say a word to anyone. What would I have said? But I've thought about it ever since. I grew up hunting. I know the sounds of the woods. I know what a fox screams like, what a rabbit in distress sounds like, the hoot of an owl, the howl of a wolf. This was none of that. It wasn't random animal noise. It was structured. It was a conversation. It had rhythm and cadence. It was intelligent. And the way it stopped, not because I asked who was there, not because I said it was a military base. It stopped when I showed a threat, when I made it clear I was ready to fight. That's what did it. That's what chilled me then, and it's what chills me now. Something out there understood that. Something understood the language of a fixed bayonet. I never saw a thing. No footprints the next morning. Nothing. Just the endless white. But I heard it. And sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the wind is just right, I think I can still hear it. Those phantom voices in the trees. And I remember the feeling of that silence rushing in, a silence that felt more intelligent and more menacing than any sound I've ever heard. I can't explain it. I never will. Story 8. Okay, I'm just gonna type this out. I've been putting it off for a while, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has seen something like this. Maybe I'm not crazy. I don't know. This happened at my place, 60 wooded acres in Adams County, Ohio. It's quiet out here, the kind of quiet you can feel in your bones. Or it was, anyway. It was a Tuesday night. I remember because my knee was killing me. I'd had surgery on it a few weeks before, and I was still stuck in that bulky brace, moving like an old truck. It was around 10 o'clock. The day had been long and dull, just me propped up on the couch with my leg elevated, watching whatever was on TV and not really taking any of it in. My wife was in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner. The kids were in their rooms, probably on their phones or something. It was a normal night. That's what gets me. It was so normal. My wife came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was heading towards the living room window to close the blinds for the night. We have these big windows that look out into the front yard, and beyond that, it's just trees, pitch black once the sun goes down. She stopped dead about 3 feet from the window. She didn't scream. It was worse than a scream. It was this choked little gasp, like all the air had been punched out of her. The dish towel just dropped from her hand onto the floor. I saw her whole body go rigid. "What?" I said, trying to push myself up on the couch, my knees screaming in protest. "What is it?" She just pointed a trembling finger at the window. Her face had gone completely white, like she'd seen a ghost, and that's when I saw them. 2 eyes, glowing, a sickly, electric green color, like something from a cheap horror movie, but this wasn't a movie. They were just floating there in the absolute darkness outside the window. They weren't reflecting light. They were making their own light. They were set close together, and they were huge, bigger than any animal's eyes I'd ever seen. They were just staring right at us, right through the glass. My heart just dropped into my stomach. It was a cold, heavy feeling, this primal fear, the kind you don't think about, it just takes over. I fumbled for the remote and muted the TV. The silence in the room was suddenly thick and heavy. At the exact same moment from the front porch, we heard my oldest son yell. It wasn't a playful yell. It was pure, undiluted panic. A sharp, "Hey, what the?" followed by the sound of the porch screen door slamming shut so hard the whole wall shook. My wife and I looked at each other, and the terror in her eyes mirrored whatever was on my face. Those green eyes were still out there, unmoving. Whatever was on the porch had scared my son, and whatever was at the window was still watching us. The logic hit me like a physical blow. There was more than one, or it had moved impossibly fast. I'm not a brave man. I want to be clear about that. But seeing my wife frozen in fear and hearing the sheer terror in my son's voice did something to me. The pain in my knee vanished under a surge of adrenaline. I shoved myself off the couch, my leg almost buckling, and I hobbled as fast as I could down the hall to our bedroom. I knew exactly where my gun was, locked in the cabinet by the bed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. The metal of the key was cold. My fingers were slippery with sweat. I finally got it open and grabbed the rifle. It felt heavy and familiar, a solid weight in my hands. I loaded it, the clicks of the bullets going into the magazine, sounding incredibly loud in the quiet house. When I came back into the living room, my wife was still standing in the same spot. But she was crying silently, tears just streaming down her face, her hand over her mouth. The green eyes were gone. The window was just a black square again. "Stay here," I said, my voice a rough whisper. It was all I could manage. I unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool and damp. It smelled like wet leaves and dirt. My son was pressed up against the front door, his back to me, breathing in ragged, shaky gulps. "What did you see?" I asked him, my voice low. I had the rifle up, my finger resting along the trigger guard, scanning the darkness. The motion sensor light on the garage was on, casting a harsh white cone of light on the gravel driveway and the side of the building. But beyond that, it was just deep, impenetrable shadows. He turned around, his face pale and his eyes wide. He was a tough kid, 17, not easily spooked, but he was spooked now. "Dad," he breathed out. There was something by the garage." The garage is detached, about 50 feet from the house. It's an old, weathered building. "What was it?" I asked, still scanning the tree line. "It was big," he said, his words tumbling out fast. "Really big, like 7 or 8 feet tall easy. It was just standing there, peeking around the corner of the garage. It was all hairy. Dark hair, like really long, shaggy hair. I couldn't see its face. The hair was covering it, but I could tell it was looking right at me. My blood went cold. 7 or 8 feet, hairy. I thought of the green eyes at the window. My wife had said they were close set. Could something have a face like that? I took a few limping steps off the porch onto the gravel. The stones crunched under my slippers. I was in my damn pajamas and a robe, my knee brace squeaking with every step, holding a rifle. It felt surreal. I swept the rifle left and right, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear every little sound, the crickets, the rustle of leaves in a slight breeze, the blood pounding in my ears. But I saw nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, no hulking figure. The motion light on the garage stayed on, illuminating an empty yard. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just listening, staring into the darkness between the trees. The woods have never felt so menacing. Every shadow looked like it could shift and move. Every rustle sounded like a footstep. Finally, the motion light timed out and clicked off, plunging the garage back into darkness. The sudden blackness felt like a threat. I backed up slowly, my bad leg making it awkward, until I felt the wooden steps of the porch behind me. I hustled back inside, locking the door and deadbolting it behind me. The three of us just stood in the living room for a minute, not saying anything. The fear was a physical thing in the room, thick enough to taste. My wife finally told me, her voice trembling, about the eyes. How they were so close together. How they weren't reflective, but glowing from within. And how they just stared without blinking. My son added more details about the figure. How it seemed to be built thick, powerful, and how it moved back behind the garage in a way that was too smooth, too fast for something that size. That's when the real horror set in, the logistics of it. My wife saw the eyes at the living room window. My son saw the figure at the garage. For him to have seen it at the exact same moment she saw the eyes, it meant there were two of them. Or, and this thought was somehow worse, it meant the one thing could move from the window to the garage corner in a matter of 2-3 seconds, across 50 feet of open ground, without making a sound, without triggering the motion light until it was already at the garage. Neither option was good, both were terrifying. We didn't sleep that night. We all crowded into our bedroom. I sat in a chair by the window with the rifle across my lap, listening. Every sound from the woods, a branch snapping, an owl hooting, made me jump. My knee started to throb again, a deep, aching pain that matched the fear in my gut. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We'd all seen it. We'd all felt it. That feeling of being watched, of being hunted. The sun took forever to come up. When the first grey light finally filtered through the trees, it felt like a reprieve. The world outside looked normal again, just our yard, our trees, our garage. Once it was fully light, I went outside. My wife begged me not to, but I had to. I had to know. I limped around the house first, checking the windows. Nothing. No scratches, no mud, nothing out of place. I felt a little foolish, standing there in the morning sun in my robe. Then I went over to the garage, to the spot where my son said he saw the figure. The ground there is hard-packed clay. It hadn't rained in a week, so it was dry and solid. I wasn't expecting to find anything, but I did. It was faint, really faint. If the angle of the morning sun hadn't been just right, casting long shadows, I would have missed it completely. It was a footprint. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a clear print, not like in mud. It was more of an impression, a depression in the hard clay, but the shape was unmistakable. It was long, really long, and it was broad at the toes and narrower at the heel. It didn't look like a bear print. Bears have claws, and this had no clear claw marks. It just looked humanoid, but way, way too big. I went back inside, my heart starting to race all over again. I got a tape measure and a piece of paper and a pencil. I came back out and knelt down, my knee complaining loudly. I measured it, 16 inches. From the back of the heel to the tip of the forefoot, 16 damn inches. I traced the outline of the impression onto the paper. My hand was shaking. I just sat there on the ground for a few minutes staring at this tracing, this proof that I wasn't crazy, that we hadn't all shared some weird group hallucination. Something had been standing right here, peeking around the corner at my son, something massive. And that's when the memory hit me. A memory from about a year ago. I'd been out back, near the tree line, stacking some firewood. It was late afternoon. From the ridge behind our property, a sound echoed down. It wasn't a coyote. I've heard coyotes my whole life. It wasn't a bobcat. This was different. It was a howl, but deeper, guttural, with a kind of weird warbling quality to it that raised the hair on my arms. It was loud, impossibly loud, and it didn't sound like any animal I knew. It sounded intelligent and angry. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds, and then it just stopped. The woods went dead silent after that, like every other animal was too scared to make a noise. I'd written it off at the time as some weird trick of the wind, or maybe a sick animal. I'd put it out of my mind. Sitting there on the ground, looking at that 16-inch outline on the paper, I knew that sound and the thing that left this print were connected. This wasn't a one-time thing. It had been here before. It had been watching us for a while. We're all still unsettled. We lock the doors now as soon as the sun goes down. We keep all the outside lights on. Every little noise at night makes us tense up. That feeling of safety, of privacy, it's gone. It's just gone. This is our home. This land has been in my family for generations, and now it feels like we're just borrowing it from something else. Something that was here long before us. Something that watched us with glowing green eyes from the dark and left a single faint footprint in the hard clay to let us know it was real. And that's it. That's what happened. I don't know what to do with this information. I don't know what it was. I just know that I saw the fear in my wife's eyes. I heard it in my son's voice, and I held the paper with that outline on it. It was here, and I think it still is. Story 9. The day started off normal enough. We drove up early, set up our tent near the lake, and decided to go for a hike in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with that crisp mountain air that makes you feel alive. My son was excited, bouncing around like kids do, pointing at every bird and squirrel. My mom was her usual calm self, just happy to be outdoors. We packed some snacks and water and headed out on one of the trails that loop around the lake. About an hour into the hike, we spotted a deer. It wasn't just any deer, though. It acted strange from the start. Instead of running away like they usually do, it just stood there, maybe 30 feet ahead of us, staring right at us. Then it started moving, but slowly, like it wanted us to follow. I'm not superstitious or anything, but it felt intentional. My son was fascinated and started trailing after it, so I followed, keeping him close. My mom hung back a bit, taking photos or something. We followed that deer for what felt like 20 minutes, deeper into the woods. The trail got narrower and the trees thickened around us. That's when my son suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. He's usually fearless, loves exploring, never says no to an adventure, but he grabbed my hand tight and said, "I don't want to go anymore." His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, and he was shaking. I asked him why, and he just shook his head and said it felt bad here. That sent a chill down my spine because he's never said anything like that before. I looked at the deer, and it had stopped too, just watching us with these dark, unblinking eyes. Then it turned and vanished into the trees like it was never there. We turned back and found my mum, who hadn't noticed much because she was lagging behind. She said something about the deer being curious, but I could tell she was a little uneasy too. The whole way back to camp, the woods felt different, quieter, like the birds had stopped singing. My son held my hand the entire time, and he wouldn't let go even when we got back to the tent. We made dinner as the sun started to set, just hot dogs and beans over the campfire, but the mood was off. My son was quiet, picking at his food, and my mom kept glancing into the trees like she expected to see something. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a weird deer, and my son was tired. But as it got dark, that's when things got really scary. I've camped a lot, so I'm used to nighttime sounds, owls, wind, even the occasional coyote. But that night, after we'd all settled into our sleeping bags, I started hearing this clacking sound. It was distant at first, like rocks hitting together, but not in a natural way. It was rhythmic, almost like someone was tapping two stones together in a pattern. Clack, clack, pause, clack, clack. It would start and stop, sometimes from one direction, then from another. I lay there in the dark, listening, and my heart started beating faster. I told myself it was probably just animals or the wind, but it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. My son was asleep next to me, and my mum was on the other side of the tent, snoring softly. I tried to ignore it and close my eyes, but the clacking kept going. It felt like it was getting closer, and at one point it sounded like it was right outside the tent. I could hear it echoing through the trees, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I remember lying there, sweating even though it was cold, and just praying for it to stop. Then I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew I was jolted awake by this pressure on my head. It felt like fingers, actual, human-like fingers, pressing down on my forehead through the tent fabric. Not hard, but firm, like someone was testing to see if I was there. I froze completely. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My eyes were wide open, staring up at the dark ceiling of the tent, and I could feel every beat of my heart pounding in my ears. The pressure lasted for what felt like a full minute, and then it lifted. But that wasn't the worst part. Right after that, the front of the tent, where the door is, started to lift. Not like it was blown by the wind. It was gentle, deliberate, like someone was pulling it up from the outside. I could see the fabric rise a few inches, and then it settled back down with a soft rustle. The whole time, the clacking sounds started up again, but this time they were different. They were responding to each other like a conversation. One set would clack from the left, then another from the right, back and forth, faster and faster. It was eerie, like some kind of signal, and it made my skin crawl. I was so scared I thought I was going to throw up. I wanted to scream, to wake up my mom or my son, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat felt tight, and my body was rigid with fear. Then I heard what I thought was my mom's voice. It sounded like she whispered my name from outside the tent, soft and urgent. That broke the spell for a second. I almost called out to her, but something stopped me. I just lay there, trembling, until the clacking faded away and everything went silent again. The rest of the night was endless. I didn't sleep a wink. I just stared at the tent walls, listening for any sound, but it was dead quiet. When the sun finally came up, I felt like I'd been through a war. My mom woke up and asked if I'd slept okay, and I told her about the sounds and the tent lifting. She looked confused and said she didn't hear anything, and she definitely didn't call my name. That made it even worse. If it wasn't her, who was it? My son woke up groggy, but seemed fine, thank God. We packed up camp quickly because none of us wanted to stay another night. As we were loading the car, we decided to take one last short hike to a viewpoint my mom wanted to see. It was around mid-morning, and the woods felt calm again, but I was on edge. That's when we heard it. a deep, low hump sound coming from a wooded slope to our left. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, like a big animal exhaling or something heavy shifting. I stopped dead and looked at my mom, but she just shrugged and said it was probably a bear or the wind. She didn't seem interested at all, which weirded me out because she's usually the cautious one. We left right after that, and the drive home was quiet. My son fell asleep in the back seat, and I kept replaying everything in my head. The deer leading us, my son's fear, the clacking, the fingers on my head, the tent lifting, that hump sound. It all felt connected, like something was toying with us. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank or animals or my imagination, but it felt too real. To this day, I can't explain what happened, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is I'll never go camping there again, and I still get chills thinking about what might have been watching us from those woods. Story 10. The day had been a typical one. Hot, humid Florida air that felt like a wet blanket the moment you stepped out of the shade. We'd canoed over from the mainland, a flotilla of aluminum boats loaded down with gear and boys buzzing with that specific energy kids get when they're cut loose from civilization. We set up camp in a clearing near the water, a collection of old canvas tents that smelled of mildew and dirt. I helped the younger scouts get their tents squared away, pounding stakes into the sandy soil, showing a 12-year-old how to tie a taut line hitch for the third time. It was my job, and I took it seriously. I was a skinny kid, 6'1", but only 120 pounds soaking wet, all arms and legs, feeling clumsy in my own body. The sun went down, and the familiar routines of a campout took over. We built a fire, cooked hot dogs and beans, the smoke stinging our eyes. We told stories, the scouts trying to scare each other with tales of the skunk ape, Florida's version of Bigfoot. I remember laughing it off, telling them it was all just folklore, stories to explain strange noises in the night. I was the responsible one, the almost adult. I had to be the voice of reason. By 11 o'clock, the fire was just embers, and the boys were winding down. The scoutmaster, Mr. Evans, a kind man with a thick head of graying hair, told me to make the final rounds, to make sure all the scouts were zipped up in their tents and settled. I did. I walked from tent to tent, the thin beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark, checking on the quiet, sleeping shapes inside. The air had cooled just enough to be comfortable, and a near full moon had risen, casting a pale, silvery light over everything. It was quiet, the kind of deep quiet you only get miles from any town, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the occasional splash of a fish in the river. After I was sure everyone was secure, a little past 11:30, I just felt this urge to walk. The moon was so bright I didn't even need my flashlight. I clicked it off, shoved it into the back pocket of my jeans, and decided to take a stroll along the water's edge. It felt good to be alone for a minute, to just be a kid under a big sky and not the one in charge. The sand was cool under my sneakers, and the moonlight made a shimmering path across the black water. I walked for maybe 15-20 minutes, just listening to the night, feeling the peace of it all. It was beautiful. On my way back to camp, I had a thought. Instead of following the long, curving shoreline back to the campsite, I could cut straight through a patch of forest. It was a shortcut I'd spotted earlier in the day, a narrow game trail that led through some thicker woods and would spit me out right near the latrine trench we'd dug. It seemed smart, efficient. I remember that thought clearly. I'll just take the shortcut. I left the open beach and stepped into the woods. The moment I did, the world changed. The moonlight, so bright on the sand, became fractured and weak, filtering down through a canopy of live oaks and slash pines. The air grew still and heavy. The sounds of the water faded, replaced by the rustle of my own footsteps through the dry palmetto fronds and fallen leaves. It was darker in there, a lot darker than I'd anticipated. My eyes strained to adjust. I could make out shapes, the thick, dark trunks of trees, the spiky outlines of palmettos, the gnarled, low-hanging branches draped in Spanish moss that brushed against my arms like cold, dead fingers. I was about halfway through when I came to a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across. The moonlight hit this spot almost directly, illuminating it in that eerie blue-silver glow. And right in the middle of this clearing, maybe 20 feet from where I stood at the tree line, was what I took to be a large, dark stump. It was a lumpy, rounded shape, about 3 feet high and broad. It looked like 100 other rotten old tree stumps you'd see in a Florida forest. My brain registered it, filed it away as part of the scenery, and dismissed it. No threat, just a stump. I was going to walk around the edge of the clearing, but the trail seemed to lead right past it, so I just started walking straight towards it. My steps were quiet, careful. I wasn't trying to be stealthy. I was just being a kid walking in the woods at night, trying not to trip. I got closer, 15 feet, 10 feet. I could see it more clearly now. It was a dark, matted mass, almost black. It didn't look like wood. Now that I was closer, it looked more like a pile of something. Like a huge, discarded bearskin rug, maybe, but that didn't make any sense. Why would a rug be out here? I was within 6 feet of it. I remember because I was counting my steps in my head, a stupid habit I had. 1 step, 2 steps. I was close enough that I could have reached out and touched it. I stopped for a second, just looking at it, my head tilted, trying to figure out what I was actually seeing. The surface wasn't smooth like weathered wood, it was textured, gnarled. It seemed to be made of thick, ropey strands, and it was glistening just slightly in the moonlight, as if it was wet or oily. And then it moved. It wasn't a shift. It wasn't a rustle. It was a single, fluid, impossibly powerful motion. The entire mass uncoiled. It just stood up. The thing that had been a stump was now a living being, and it was towering over me. I froze. My breath locked in my throat. My heart didn't just beat fast. It felt like it seized solid in my chest, a cold, hard lump of pure terror. The creature was huge. It had to be at least 6 feet tall, but it was so much broader than me. I was a string bean, but this thing was massive, built like a refrigerator. I'd guess 300 pounds. Easy. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, sloping down into long, heavy arms that hung past its knees. Its entire body was covered in that same dark, glistening hair, long and shaggy, like a wet dog, but thicker, coarser. We were face to face, or at least I was facing where its face should have been. I couldn't see any eyes. I couldn't make out a nose or a mouth. The head was just a darker, shapeless mass atop those colossal shoulders. There were no features, just shadow and hair and the sheer, overwhelming presence of it. But I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its gaze like a physical pressure. It was studying me, the same way I had been studying it a second before. Time stopped. It felt like an eternity we stood there, locked in that silent stare-down in the moonlit clearing. My body was screaming at me to run, to scream, to do anything, but every muscle was locked solid. I was a statue. I could smell it now. A smell I'd never encountered before or since. It was a thick, heavy, musky odor, like a combination of wet dog, old manure, and something else. Something rotten and sweet all at once. It was the smell of the wild, but a wild I didn't recognize. It filled my nostrils and my lungs, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. I don't know how long we stood like that. 5 seconds, a full minute. It could have been an hour for all I knew. My mind was a frantic, silent scream. This isn't happening. This can't be real. Stumps don't stand up. Then it moved again. It didn't growl. It didn't charge at me. It just turned its head slightly, a slow, deliberate movement, and then it took off. It spun around with a speed that was shocking for something so big, and it ran. Its gait wasn't human. It was a long, loping, powerful stride, covering ground so fast it was almost a blur. It didn't run on two legs like a man. It was more of a sprint, its long arms pumping, its body low to the ground. It crashed through a thicket of palmettos and then into a patch of taller grass, and saw palmettos we called a palm meadow. The sound was unbelievable. It wasn't just the sound of something running. It was a crashing, tearing, smashing noise. It sounded like a bulldozer plowing through the undergrowth. I could hear the sharp crack of palm fronds and small branches snapping, the heavy thudding impact of its feet on the earth. The sound moved away from me at an incredible speed, tearing a path through the forest, growing fainter and fainter with each second, and then silence. It was the silence that finally broke the spell on me. The abrupt, total, deafening silence that fell after that storm of noise. 1 second, the world was filled with the sound of its escape, and the next, there was nothing, not a rustle, not a snapped twig, nothing. It was just gone. My body unlocked all at once. A violent whole-body shudder ran through me, and I stumbled backward, my legs feeling like rubber. I turned and I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran, blind with terror, back the way I had come. I wasn't following the trail. I was just crashing through the woods, palmetto fronds whipping at my legs, branches scraping my arms and face. I didn't feel any of it. The only thing I felt was the raw animal fear pumping through my veins. My lungs burned, and I was sobbing great, ragged gasps of air that were half scream, half hyperventilation. I burst out of the tree line and into our campsite. The sight of the familiar tents, the dying embers of the fire, was surreal. It felt like I had been gone for years, like I had returned to a different world. I ran straight to Mr. Evans's tent. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I fumbled with the tent flap, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the zipper. "Mr. Evans," I whispered, my voice a hoarse, broken thing. "Mr. Evans." He stirred inside his sleeping bag. "What is it, son?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I crawled partway into the tent. I could smell the familiar scent of canvas and his Old Spice aftershave, and it clashed violently with the lingering phantom smell of the creature that was still in my nose. "There's something out there," I choked out. "In the woods. I saw it." He sat up, his face a pale blob in the dark. "What did you see? A bear? A panther?" "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice trembling uncontrollably. It was a stump. And then it stood up. It was huge. It had long arms. It ran off. I was babbling. I knew I sounded insane. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the quiet, even breathing of the scouts in the tents around us. The normalcy of it was maddening. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You just had a scare, son. Your eyes can play tricks on you in the dark. It was probably just a shadow, a trick of the moonlight." "No," I insisted, my voice rising in panic. It was real. I was 6 feet from it. I smelled it. Okay, he said, his voice calm, patronizing. "Whatever it was, it's gone now. It ran away, right? It didn't hurt you." I just stared at him, my whole body shaking. "Look," he said, his tone final, "you need to get some rest. Go back to your tent. Everything is fine. We'll talk about it in the morning if you want." "We'll talk about it in the morning." He said it the way you'd promise a child you'd look for the monster under the bed. He didn't believe me, not a word of it. He thought I was a scared kid who'd spooked himself on a walk. I crawled back out of his tent, feeling hollow and more alone than I ever had in my life. The terror was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but now it was mixed with a crushing sense of isolation. I went to my own tent and zipped myself inside. I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dark, curled in my sleeping bag, listening to every single sound the night made. Every rustle was it coming back. Every snap of a twig was its footstep. I stared at the wall of the tent, expecting a shadow to fall over it, expecting a powerful hand to tear the canvas open. The morning came, bright and sunny and normal. The scouts were loud and cheerful, complaining about the powdered eggs we cooked for breakfast. Mr. Evans gave me a kind, slightly concerned look, but didn't say a word about what happened. He never brought it up. Not on the canoe trip back, not at the next troop meeting, not ever. It was like the whole thing was a secret we had agreed to never mention. I tried to talk to a couple of the older scouts once, but they just laughed and said I'd probably seen a bear on its hind legs. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't my imagination. That thing, that creature was real. The suddenness of it transforming from an inanimate object into a living, breathing, powerful being is what haunts me. One second it was part of the landscape, and the next second it was the most alive thing I had ever seen. The sheer physical power in its movement, the way it tore through the forest like it wasn't even there, the way it just vanished into total silence. I'm an old man now. I've lived a long life, raised a family, had a career, but not a single week has gone by in all these years that I haven't thought about that night in the Florida woods. The image is as clear today as it was then. The moonlit clearing, the dark stump, the sudden, terrifying uncoiling, the massive, hairy form, the feeling of being utterly and completely seen by something that was not human, and the silence that followed. That's the part I can never explain to anyone, the part that still gives me chills. The way it was just there, and then it was gone without a trace, as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. I saw it, and then I didn't, and I've never known what it was. Story 11. I was heading back to Oregon after visiting some friends down in Redding. It was just past midnight, and I was pushing through the Siskiyou summit, that long, winding climb right near the California-Oregon border. I'd made this drive a dozen times, but always hated doing it this late. The darkness out there isn't like city darkness. It's complete. It's a blackness that feels heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. My headlights were just two weak pools of yellow light fighting against it, showing me the asphalt right in front of me and nothing else. The road was clear, though. Not another soul. The sky was packed with stars, more than you ever see anywhere else, like someone had thrown a fistful of glitter across black velvet. I had the window down a crack, and the air coming in was cold and clean, smelling of pine and high-altitude chill. I was just driving, you know. One hand on the wheel, the other arm resting on the door. My mind a million miles away, thinking about work the next day, about the leftover pizza in my cooler in the back, just normal, boring stuff. I was coming around a long, sweeping corner to the left, the kind where you can't see what's ahead until you're already committed to the turn. My headlights swept across the empty oncoming lanes, the center divider, the dark trees on the right. And then something moved. It came from the left. A shape, massive and dark, just leaped over the concrete center divider. It wasn't a graceful jump, not like a deer. It was this powerful, heavy vault. One moment the divider was empty, and the next, this thing was just there, landing on its feet on my side of the highway. My brain didn't even have time to process what it was. All my instincts screamed, person. I slammed my foot on the brake. The old El Camino shuddered, the tires chirping in protest. The seatbelt locked and dug into my shoulder. In that split second, as the car slowed, my headlights fully illuminated it, and I realized it wasn't running. It was just walking. It took 1, 2 slow, deliberate steps from the left lane into my lane, and then it stopped. Right on the center line, I had to swerve. I jerked the wheel to the right, the car skidding, the back end feeling loose for a terrifying moment. I came to a stop maybe 20 feet from it, angled across the right lane, my engine still rumbling, my headlights pointing right at it, and I saw it. I saw what it was. It was standing there, perfectly still, facing me. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be over 7 feet easy. Its shoulders were impossibly broad like a heavyweight wrestler, but it had a hunched quality to its posture, like its neck and back were one solid, powerful curve. Its body was covered in hair. Not fur like a bear, but hair. It was a medium dark brown color, and it was long, maybe 3 inches all over, and it looked thick and matted in places. It was like nothing I had ever seen. Its arms were what got me next. They were so long, disgustingly long. They hung down past its knees, and its hands weren't paws. They were like huge, rough human hands with thick fingers. I couldn't see its feet clearly because of the way it was standing and the angle of my lights, but they looked big, really big. Its face, God, its face. The hair on its head was the same as on its body, and its eyes were the darkest things I've ever seen. They weren't glowing red or anything from the headlights. They were just dark, deep-set pits that seemed to blend right into the dark brown of its coat. There was no white to them at all. It had a heavy brow, and its nose was flat, and its mouth, I don't even know how to describe its mouth. It was just there, a line in the hair, and it was looking right at me. That was the most profound part of the whole thing. It wasn't looking at the car. It was looking at me, through the windshield. Its head was tilted just a little, and the expression in those dark eyes wasn't aggression. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity and hesitation. It looked confused, like it wasn't sure where it was or what my car was. It looked lost. The initial terror, the heart-pounding, gut-dropping fear of thinking I was about to hit a person, was gone. It just vanished, replaced by this awe, this complete and total shock. My mind was racing, a jumble of thoughts. That's not a bear. That's not a man in a suit. That's real. That is really, really real. My hands were glued to the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm, but my mind was eerily calm. I was just staring, taking in every detail, the way the muscles in its shoulders moved under the hair as it breathed, the way the cold night air made little puffs of vapor when it exhaled. The sheer, raw presence of it. It felt ancient. It felt like I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to be seen. We just stayed like that, locked in that silent stare-down. It felt like an eternity. It was probably only 10, 15 seconds, but time just stopped. The only sound was the rumbling idle of my El Camino and the blood pounding in my ears. I wasn't thinking about Bigfoot or legends or anything like that. I was just experiencing it. This living, breathing thing standing in the middle of the road. I remember a very specific, stupid detail. The radio was on low, playing some classic rock station. I think it was Hotel California. And in that moment, the lyrics, "You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave," felt horrifyingly appropriate. I was trapped, not by it, but by the situation. I couldn't move. I couldn't drive away. I was just a spectator to this impossible moment. It never felt threatening. That's the part people have the hardest time believing. It never bared its teeth. It never growled. It never took a step toward me. It just studied me with this deep, primal curiosity. It was like we were two creatures from different worlds who had accidentally stumbled into the same space, and we were both trying to figure out what the other one was. Then it moved. It broke eye contact with me and looked down the road, then back into the woods on my right. It took a step. Its gait was heavy, solid. Each footfall seemed to have weight to it. Then another step. It wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't running away in fear. It was just leaving. It took 3 of these long, powerful strides, covering an incredible amount of distance with each one. And then it was at the edge of the asphalt. It didn't break stride. It just stepped off the road into the dark of the trees, and it was gone, just like that. One moment it was there, a massive, impossible silhouette in my headlights, and the next, the space where it had been, was empty. The forest had just swallowed it whole. There was no sound, no cracking branches, no rustling leaves, nothing. It vanished with a silence that was more frightening than any noise it could have made. I sat there for I don't know how long. A minute? 5 minutes? My body was trembling, a full-body shake that started deep in my core. I finally took a breath, a deep, ragged gasp, and realized I'd been holding it. I looked into the woods where it had disappeared. Nothing, just impenetrable blackness. My first coherent thought was, I have to get out of here. I put the car in drive, my hand shaking so badly I fumbled with the gear shift. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it standing in the middle of the highway behind me, watching me go. But there was nothing, just the empty road swallowed by the night. I drove. I didn't speed. I drove exactly the speed limit, my hands at 10 and 2, my body rigid. I kept scanning the sides of the road, my heart leaping into my throat every time my headlights caught a tall bush or a weirdly shaped stump. The rest of the drive home is a blur. I don't remember passing any other cars. I don't remember the rest of the music on the radio. I just remember the cold sweat on my back, the tightness in my chest, and the image of that thing burned onto the back of my eyelids every time I blinked. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sky was starting to get light in the east. I turned off the engine and just sat there in the sudden, deafening silence. The normal sounds of my neighborhood, a dog barking, a newspaper hitting a driveway, felt alien and wrong. The world had changed. I had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. I got out of the car and my legs almost buckled. I walked around to the front, my steps slow and unsteady. I don't know what I was looking for. Some proof, a scratch, a hair, something. There was nothing. Just the cool morning air and the smell of my own exhaust. I never told the police. What would I have said? Hey, I saw a big hairy man in the road. They'd have thought I was drunk or crazy. I told my brother a few days later, and he just laughed and said I needed more sleep, so I stopped talking about it. But I never forgot, not for a single day. That encounter did two things to me. It scared me in a deep, fundamental way that I can't really explain. It's the fear of knowing that the world is a much bigger, much stranger, and much more unknown place than we ever let ourselves believe. The maps aren't finished. The shadows still hold things. But the other thing it gave me was a weird sort of gratitude. I'm grateful that I saw it. I'm grateful that I know. And I'm so profoundly grateful that in that moment, when I slammed on my brakes, I didn't hit it, I didn't hurt it. The thought of that magnificent, elusive creature being splattered across the grill of my car because it was confused and in the wrong place, it makes me feel sick to my stomach even now. All these years later, I still have the El Camino. It's sitting in my garage. I don't drive it much anymore, but sometimes on a quiet night, I'll go out there, sit in the driver's seat, and just remember. I can still feel the vibration of the engine, see the starry sky through the windshield, and feel that cold night air on my face. And I can still see it, clear as day, standing there in the road, looking at me with those dark, curious eyes. A creature just passing through, as lost in our world as I would be in its. I saw it, I know what I saw, and nothing will ever convince me otherwise. Story 12. It was one of those Kansas summer days where the air feels like a wet blanket you can't shake off. The heat wasn't just hot, it was heavy. It pressed down on you, made every breath feel like you were sucking on a thick soup. The sun was a brute, glaring off the surface of the river until it hurt to look at it for too long. My buddy and I, we'd picked this spot on the Neosho River because it was supposed to be good for catfish, and more importantly, because it was quiet. We'd been coming out here for years, since we were kids skipping school. It was our place. That day, it was just him and me and our two dogs, his old lab mix, Duke, and my border collie, Finn. We'd been there since maybe 9 in the morning. I remember the time because I'd complained about getting up so early on a Saturday. But once we were there, with the cool river water around our legs and the sound of nothing but insects and the occasional splash of a fish, it was worth it. My companion was about 50, 60 yards upstream from me. We'd split up to cover more water, The dogs were just lounging in the shallows, panting, their tails making little muddy clouds in the water every now and then. I was focused, just staring at the red and white bobber on the surface, waiting for that little jerk and dip. The sun was beating down on the back of my neck, and I was just starting to feel that good kind of tired you get from being outside all day. Everything was normal. It was so damn normal. Then I heard the breathing. At first I thought it was one of the dogs. Maybe Duke had come down and was behind me, panting from the heat. But it was different. This wasn't a dog's pant. It was deeper, slower. A heavy, rhythmic hoo-ah sound, like something big was drawing air in and pushing it out. But there was a wet, guttural quality to it, like you'd hear from a person with a bad chest, cold but amplified. It was unnaturally deep. It didn't belong. The sound was coming from directly behind me, from the bank. My skin just prickled all over, like I'd been dunked in ice water despite the heat. My heart, which had been lazy and slow, just slammed into my ribs. I froze. I didn't want to turn around. I honestly didn't. Every stupid horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my head, every story my grandpa told about things in the woods. But I had to. I had to know. I turned my head slowly, so slowly my neck cracked, and I saw it, about 100 feet away, right on the edge of the tree line, standing next to a big old cottonwood tree, was this figure. It was tall, so damn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least 7, maybe more. It was just standing there, perfectly still, except for the rise and fall of its chest. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's. It was a darker brown, almost black in places, and it looked matted, like it had been wet and dried in the sun. Its build wasn't bulky like a bear either. It was athletic, powerful, broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist, with long, muscular arms that hung down past its knees. But it was the face that stopped my heart. It wasn't a snout. It was flatter, more human, and its eyes, they were the most human thing about it. Dark, deep set, and they were locked right on me. There was an intelligence in them, not an animal curiosity, but a knowing, a staring, focused, intense knowing. It was looking right at me, and it was seeing me. We just stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a couple of minutes. The world just shrank down to that space between us. I couldn't hear the river anymore. I couldn't feel the sun. All I could hear was that heavy, wet breathing and the pounding of my own blood in my ears. All I could feel was a cold terror that started in my gut and spread out to my fingers and toes, making them numb. I was utterly, completely defenseless. I had a fishing rod. That was it. A stupid fishing rod against whatever that was. My mind was screaming at me to run, to scream, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. It was like I was rooted to the spot. The only thing I could manage was to slowly, so slowly I thought it might notice the movement, open my hand and let my fishing pole drop into the river. It just vanished under the surface with a soft bloop. I didn't care. It was meaningless. I had to get to my companion. He was upstream, around a slight bend in the river. I couldn't see him from where I was. I started to move, not turning my back on the thing. I shuffled sideways, my boots scraping on the rocky riverbed. The water, which had felt so refreshing before, now felt like a trap, slowing me down. I tried to call out. My voice came out as a dry croak. "Hey!" Nothing. I tried again, a little louder. "Hey!" It was useless. The river noise and the distance swallowed it up, and while I was doing this, the thing moved. It didn't walk, it didn't run, it shifted. One moment it was by the first cottonwood tree, and in a blur of motion that was too fast for something that big, it was behind another tree, maybe 20 feet to the left. It was so quick and quiet it was disorienting. There was no sound of cracking twigs, no rustle of leaves. It just relocated, and its eyes never left me. That stare never broke. It was like it was playing a game with me, showing me how easily it could move, how trapped I really was. That's when the real fear set in, the kind that makes your bowels feel loose. Up until then, a tiny, desperate part of my brain was still trying to rationalize it. A guy in a suit, a prank, some weird escaped animal from a zoo. But that movement, that wasn't human. Nothing that big and solid should be able to move like that. It was effortless, almost fluid, and the prank idea died right there. Who would go to that much trouble out in the middle of nowhere just to stare at some guy fishing? It didn't make sense. This was something else, something sinister. The intelligence in its eyes now felt predatory. I kept shuffling, my legs feeling like rubber. I was terrified that if I turned to run, it would be on me in a second. So I kept my eyes on it, walking backwards and sideways like a crab, the cold water sloshing around my thighs. Every second felt like an eternity. I could see every detail now that I was closer to the bank. The way the hair on its arms was longer than on its chest. The way its feet, which were huge, seemed to grip the ground. The sheer bulk of it silhouetted against the lighter bark of the tree. It was real, it was solid, it was there. Finn, my border collie, finally noticed something was wrong. He'd been snoozing in the water, but he got up and started to growl, a low, uncertain rumble in his chest. He was looking past me at the thing on the bank. Duke, the lab, just whined and stayed where he was. Finn took a few steps toward the bank, his fur bristling, but then he stopped and backed into my legs, still growling. He was scared too. That confirmation that my dog saw it and was terrified made my stomach drop even further. I don't know how long it took me to get around that bend. It felt like a lifetime. The whole time those eyes were on me. That breathing was the soundtrack to my panic. When I finally saw my companion, he was reeling in his line, his back to me. I must have made some kind of noise because he turned around. The look on my face must have said everything. His own easy-going expression just melted away. "What? What is it?" he asked, his voice tight. I couldn't get the words out right. I was gasping, pointing back the way I came. There's something back there, in the trees." "What? A bear?" I just shook my head, my whole body trembling now that I had stopped moving. No, it's not a bear. It was looking at me. My voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand myself. It's tall, hairy. It was just staring. He saw I wasn't joking. He saw the pure, undiluted fear. He quickly reeled in his line and sloshed over to me. Okay, take it easy. Show me." The walk back was worse than the walk away. Now I had him with me, and a part of me felt a little braver, but a bigger part was screaming that I was leading my friend into danger. We moved slowly, him in front now, holding his fishing rod like a club. The dogs followed us, whining, tails tucked between their legs. The normal sounds of the afternoon were back, but they felt wrong now. Ominous. We rounded the bend. The spot where I'd been fishing was just ahead. My empty tackle box was still on a rock. The river flowed on, indifferent. The bank was empty. The thing was gone. We stood there for a minute, just scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The oppressive silence felt even heavier than before. "Are you sure?" my companion asked, his voice low. "Maybe it was a shadow or something. The light plays tricks out here." "I'm sure," I whispered. I was more sure of that than anything in my life. It was right there, by that tree. I pointed to the second cottonwood, the one it had shifted to. He waded out of the river and onto the bank, his eyes scanning the ground. I followed him, my legs still weak. The bank there was mostly dry, packed sand and dirt with a few patches of grass. He looked for a long time. I looked too. We looked for footprints, for broken branches, for any sign at all that something massive had been standing there just minutes before. There was nothing. The sand was smooth and undisturbed, no tracks, no depressions, nothing. It was as if it had never been there at all. The only footprints were my own, from when I had first arrived hours ago, and the fresh ones we were making now. My companion looked at me, and I saw the doubt in his eyes finally get replaced by a slow, dawning unease. He believed me. He knew I wasn't the type to spook easily, and he saw the same thing I did. Nothing, no tracks. How does something that big, that heavy, leave no trace? We didn't say much on the way back to the truck. We just loaded the dogs and our gear as fast as we could and got out of there. The ride home was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts, staring out the windows at the passing fields. I've turned that day over in my head 1,000 times since. I've tried to find an explanation, a hallucination from the heat, but the dogs saw it too. A prank, the movement, the lack of tracks, it rules that out. A bear. I've seen bears. That wasn't a bear. It's been years now, but I still dream about it sometimes. Not the whole event, just the eyes, those deep, dark, human-like eyes, locked on mine. That feeling of being seen, of being known by something that shouldn't exist. The sheer, unnatural silence of its movement, the complete absence of any evidence. I never went back to that spot on the Neo show. I still fish, but I stick to crowded lakes now, where the only thing staring at me is another fisherman. What happened that day left a mark on me. It's a memory that doesn't fade, a chill that never quite goes away, no matter how intense the Kansas sun gets. I saw something out there, something that defies everything I thought I knew, and it saw me, and to this day I have no idea what it was. Story 13. It was August 16th, 2015. That date is burned into my head. My kid and I, we'd been planning this camping trip for a couple weeks. Just a father-son thing, you know. He was excited. I was excited. We have this old pop-up camper, the kind you hitch to the back of the truck and it folds out. It's not fancy, but it's cozy. We drove out to this spot in the National Forest, a place I'd been to a few times before. It's remote, really remote. The kind of place where you don't get any cell service, and the only sounds are supposed to be the wind and the birds. We got there in the afternoon and set up camp. It was a beautiful day, sunny, but not too hot. My son, he was running around exploring the immediate area while I got the camper leveled and the awning set up. I remember the smell of pine needles and that clean, dry mountain air. I had a specific reason for this trip, beyond just camping. I'm kind of an amateur audio guy. I like to record nature sounds, birds, crickets, that kind of thing. I brought a couple of my good digital audio recorders with me. I set one up on a tree about 50 yards from the camper, pointing towards a creek bed. I set the other one on the picnic table just to capture the general ambience of our site. I thought maybe I'd get some cool owl calls or something. I had no idea. The evening was perfect. We cooked hot dogs on the little propane grill, made s'mores. My kid told me about some video game he was into, and we just talked. It was one of those good, simple nights. I put him to bed in the camper around 9:30. He was out like a light, tired from the fresh air and the excitement. I stayed up for a bit, sitting in a camp chair with a beer, just looking at the stars. There were so many stars out there, away from all the city lights. It was peaceful. I remember feeling really content. I turned in around 11, locking the flimsy little camper door and climbing into my bunk. I must have fallen asleep pretty fast. The next thing I knew, I was jolted awake. It was pitch black, the kind of dark you only get in the deep woods. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. 1:13 in the morning. My heart was already thumping, just from being startled awake. Then I heard it. It was a sound from outside, a single heavy footstep. Not like a deer. Deer steps are light, tentative. This was a solid thump. It was close. I held my breath, listening so hard my ears started to ring in the silence. Then I heard another one, and another. It was walking, a slow, deliberate, heavy walk. It was circling the camper. I laid there frozen, my whole body tense. I could hear my son breathing softly in his bunk across from me. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could feel the presence, you know? It's hard to explain, but you can just feel when something is right there, just on the other side of a thin piece of aluminum and fiberglass. Then the camper shifted. We have a little metal step that folds down from the door. Something stepped onto it. I felt the whole camper tilt, just a little, with a faint metallic groan. The step creaked under the weight. Whatever was on it was heavy, really heavy. This wasn't a raccoon or a bear looking for food scraps. A bear might knock over a cooler, but it wouldn't carefully step onto the camper step like a person. Then the knocking started. It wasn't a random bang, it was a knock. 1, 2, 3, solid, firm raps on the side of the camper, right near the door, like someone was politely asking to be let in. My blood went cold. I didn't move a muscle. I just stared into the darkness towards the door, my hand creeping slowly under my pillow where I kept my handgun. It's a 9mm. I'm a responsible owner. I never thought I'd actually need it for something like this. The knocking stopped. For a second, there was just silence. Then a different sound, a slap. It was a hard, open-palmed slap against the camper wall, right above where my head was lying. The whole wall panel vibrated with the impact. I actually flinched, a little gasp escaping my lips. Then the scratching started. Long, slow, deliberate scrapes along the side of the camper. It sounded like fingernails, but bigger, much bigger. It was dragging something along the aluminum, making this horrible high-pitched scraping noise that set my teeth on edge. This went on for what felt like an hour. Knocks, slaps, scratches. It would move from one side of the camper to the other. I could hear its footsteps. That heavy, bipedal thump, thump, thump as it paced around us. I had my gun in my hand now, the grip slick with my sweat. I was pointing it at the door, my finger resting along the frame, not on the trigger but ready. Every muscle in my body was wound up so tight I was starting to ache. I kept looking over at my son, praying he wouldn't wake up. The terror I felt wasn't just for me. It was this primal, overwhelming need to protect him from whatever was out there. Then things escalated. It was maybe 3 in the morning. The noises had been going on for almost 2 hours. There was a lull, a few minutes of utter silence. I started to hope stupidly that it had gotten bored and left. That's when it hit the camper. It wasn't a slap or a knock. It was a full-bodied, massive impact. It felt like a car had hit us. The whole camper rocked violently on its suspension. The dishes in the little sink cupboard clattered together. My son stirred in his sleep, mumbling something. I thought for sure the walls were going to buckle. I raised my gun, my arms trembling, aiming directly at the door. I was breathing in short, ragged gasps. I was ready to shoot through the door. I didn't care about the consequences. Something was trying to get in. That's when the vocalization started. The first one was a low growl. It was so deep I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. It was right outside the door. It wasn't a bear growl. I've heard bears. This was different, deeper, more guttural, with a kind of intelligence behind it that made my skin crawl. Then, from a little further off, maybe near the tree line, came an answer, a howl, but it wasn't a wolf. It was this wretched, screaming howl that rose in pitch and then broke off into a series of chattering, almost laughing barks. It was the most unnatural sound I've ever heard. It sounded angry and mocking at the same time. After that, the woods just erupted. Growls, howls, screams. They were coming from different distances. One would be close, right on top of us, then another would answer from 100 yards away, then another from even further. They were communicating. I was absolutely certain of it. They were talking to each other about us. The one close to the camper would let out these low, rumbling grunts, and something out in the darkness would scream back. The sounds would sometimes overlap, creating this horrible chorus that surrounded us completely. There was nowhere to run. We were trapped in this flimsy pop-up camper, in the middle of a nightmare. I remembered my thermal imager. It's a handheld unit I use for spotting wildlife sometimes. I fumbled for it in the dark, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I switched it on and pointed it at the window, scanning the darkness outside. The screen showed shades of black and white. I could see the cold trees, the slightly warmer ground. But where the sounds were coming from, there was nothing, just empty space. Once, I thought I saw a flicker of heat, a tall bipedal shape for just a split second near the tree where I'd left my audio recorder. But it was gone so fast I couldn't be sure I hadn't imagined it. It was like it knew I was looking, and it moved out of the way. The thermal saw nothing but the occasional heat signature of a small animal scurrying away, terrified by the commotion. The things making the sounds were either completely cold-blooded, or they could control their body heat in a way I couldn't understand. The frustration and fear of having a tool like that and it showing me nothing just made everything 10 times worse. The rest of the night was a blur of pure terror. The noises never stopped for more than a few minutes at a time. The thing would come back to the camper, slap the walls, scratch at the roof, shake the step. The vocalizations from the woods continued, a constant, terrifying soundtrack. I sat on the floor between the bunks, my back against the cooler, my gun in my lap, pointed at the door. I didn't take my eyes off it. I was cold, but I was sweating. My mouth was dry as dust. Every new sound made me jump. I watched the hands on my watch move, minute by agonizingly slow minute. I prayed for the sun to come up. The world outside the camper started to lighten from black to a deep dark blue. The stars began to fade. Around 5:30, the noises started to change. The aggressive slaps and knocks on the camper stopped. The footsteps moved away. The growls and screams from the woods became less frequent, more spaced out. It was like they were packing up and leaving. The last vocalization I heard was a long, drawn-out howl from a great distance. It didn't sound angry anymore. It sounded almost sorrowful, or maybe that's just what I wanted to hear. Then it was gone. By 6:30, it was over. The forest was silent again, except for the first tentative chirps of the morning birds. The sun was cresting the ridge, casting long golden beams of light through the trees. It was a beautiful, peaceful sunrise, and it felt like the most obscene lie I had ever seen. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there on the floor, listening to the normal sounds of the woods returning. My body felt like it had been beaten with a bat. I was exhausted, but buzzing with leftover adrenaline. My son finally woke up around 7, cheerful and completely oblivious. "Good morning, Dad," he said, rubbing his eyes. I forced a smile. "Morning, buddy." We packed up in record time. I didn't even make coffee. I just threw everything into the truck, folded the camper up as fast as my shaking hands would allow, and got us the hell out of there. I didn't say a word to my son about what happened. What would I have said? When I got home, the first thing I did was check the audio recorders. The one on the picnic table had recorded the entire night. I listened to it on my computer with headphones. It was all there. The heavy footsteps, the knocks, the slaps, the scratching, the terrifying impact, and the whole chorus of growls, howls, and screams. It was even more chilling hearing it back, knowing what was happening. The other recorder, the one I'd placed 50 yards away by the creek, was gone. The tree I'd strapped it to was scratched to hell about 6 feet up, and the recorder was just vanished. I still have that audio file. I've never shown it to anyone. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what was out there that night. People talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I never believed in any of that. I was a skeptic. Now, I don't know what to believe. All I know is that something intelligent, something powerful, and something that did not want to be seen surrounded my camper and terrorized me and my son for over 5 hours. It knew we were in there. It was playing with us. And when the sun came up, it just left. I haven't been camping since. I look at the woods differently now. I hear a branch snap when I'm out in the yard, and my heart jumps into my throat. That night, August 16th, 2015, something in the world broke for me. The world isn't as safe or as known as I thought it was. There are things in the deep, dark woods that we don't understand, and after that night, I know for a fact that at least one of them knows about me. Story 14. It was July of 1997, and the air was so thick with heat you could almost chew it. I remember the smell most of all. That damp, earthy smell of the woods behind our house after a rain, a mix of wet pine needles and rotting leaves. We were just kids, me and my 3 siblings, messing around in the trees, building a pathetic little fort out of fallen branches. The sun was cutting through the canopy in dusty shafts, and the bugs were out in full force, that constant droning buzz that just becomes part of the background after a while. We were taking a break, sitting on a mossy log, just talking about nothing. Then one of my siblings, I won't say which one, just said it real casual, like they were mentioning what they had for lunch. They said they'd seen something the day before, back near the old creek bed. A big white figure just standing between the trees. They said it was tall, real tall, and just stood there watching before it moved off. We all kind of laughed it off, you know how you do. We teased them, called them crazy, said it was probably just a trick of the light or a weirdly shaped birch tree, but even then, I felt this little cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't the words, it was the way they said it. There was no excitement, no drama, it was flat, matter of fact, and their eyes had this distant look, like they were seeing it all over again. The joking died down pretty quick, and we all just got quiet for a minute, listening to the woods in a way we hadn't before. That was the seed. For the next 3 months, I couldn't get it out of my head. Every time I was in those woods, my eyes would dart into the shadows between the trunks. Every snapped twig was a little jolt to the heart. I started noticing things I never had before, how quiet the birds would get sometimes for no reason, or the way the hair on my arms would stand up in certain parts of the forest for no reason at all. It became this low-grade, constant hum of anxiety whenever I was out there. Then it happened. It was 3 months later, October. The leaves had started to turn, splashes of fiery red and orange against the deep green of the pines. The air had that crisp, clean bite to it that makes you feel more alive. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because I'd just gotten home from school. It was around 5 in the afternoon. The sun was already getting low, casting long, distorted shadows that made the familiar woods look strange and twisted. My friend was over, and we decided to go for a walk. We didn't have a plan. We were just wandering, kicking up leaves, talking about school and stupid kid stuff. We came to the edge of the woods, where it opens up into this big, overgrown field. It's mostly tall, browning grass and a few scrubby bushes. We stepped out of the tree line, the late afternoon sun warm on our faces after the cool shade of the forest. We'd only taken a few steps into the field when I saw it. My friend saw it at the exact same time. I felt him go rigid beside me. About 100 feet away, right at the tree line on the other side of the field, was a creature. It's hard to even write that word, it sounds so ridiculous, but that's what it was. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in shaggy, dirty white fur, like an old, unwashed sheep. It wasn't standing fully upright, but it wasn't crouched like an ape either. It was kind of stooped, with these incredibly long, lanky arms that hung down past its knees, and legs that looked just as long and powerful. It was half turned away from us, one shoulder towards us, and it seemed to be looking down at something on the ground. My brain just short-circuited. It tried to fit what I was seeing into a box, I understood. A bear? No, the proportions were all wrong, and it was the wrong color. A person in a suit? Absolutely not. The way it moved its head, the sheer mass of it, the way the fur lay on its body. It was alive. It was a living, breathing thing. The whole world seemed to slow down and get incredibly loud and incredibly quiet at the same time. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a deafening roar, but I could also hear every single individual leaf rustling in the breeze. I could feel the individual blades of grass against my jeans. I remember my mouth was hanging open, and I could feel a tiny thread of drool starting to form at the corner because I'd forgotten to swallow. My friend made this sound next to me, a tiny, choked-off gasp, like all the air had been punched out of him. And then it noticed us. It didn't hear us. We hadn't made a sound. It just sensed us. Its head swung around in our direction. I didn't get a good look at its face. It happened too fast, and my eyes were just sort of swimming over the whole terrifying image. I didn't see eyes or a nose or a mouth. It was just a dark patch under the mass of white hair where a face should be, but I felt its attention. It was a physical sensation, like a pressure change in the air, a weight settling on my chest. For a split second it was frozen, and we were frozen. A perfect, horrible tableau in that dying October light. Then it ran. It didn't turn and lope away. It didn't amble off into the trees. It bolted. The movement was so unnaturally fast, it was like a film reel skipping frames. One moment it was there, and in the space of a single heartbeat, it was gone. It didn't crash through the undergrowth. There was no sound. It just vanished into the deep shadows of the pines with a speed that was simply impossible. It moved with a raw, explosive power that was nothing like a deer or a bear. It was a blur of white, a violent eruption of motion, and then silence. The field was empty. My friend and I just stood there. I think we stood there for a full minute, maybe two, not moving, not speaking. The first thing I became aware of was a sharp, stinging pain in my palms. I looked down and saw I'd clenched my fists so tight. My fingernails had cut half moons into my skin. My legs felt like they were made of water. I finally managed to turn my head to look at my friend. His face was bone white, his eyes wide with a terror I'd never seen before. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You saw that, right?" I whispered. My voice was hoarse, barely audible. He just nodded, a quick, jerky motion. He couldn't speak. We didn't say another word. We turned and ran. We ran like our lives depended on it back through the woods, branches whipping at our faces and arms, not caring about the path, just running blindly towards home. The terror was a live wire in my chest, a cold, electric fear that pushed every ounce of strength into my legs. I've never run that fast in my life, before or since. We burst out of the tree line into our backyard, gasping for air, our hearts hammering against our ribs like they were trying to break out. We didn't tell our parents. What would we have said? We saw a monster. They'd have thought we were lying or that we'd imagined it. We just went inside, pale and shaking, and made up some story about seeing a coyote. We didn't talk about it with each other for days. It was too big, too frightening. It felt like if we said it out loud, it would make it more real, and we couldn't handle that. But that wasn't the end of it. That was just the beginning of the dread. That winter, after the first big snowfall, I got the courage to go back to that field. I don't know why. Some morbid, terrified curiosity. The snow was pristine and untouched, sparkling under a weak sun. And there they were, footprints. They were massive. I knelt down next to one. I remember pulling off my glove and laying my hand next to it. My hand looked like a child's. The print was at least 14, maybe 15 inches long. It wasn't shaped like a human foot. A human foot is narrower at the arch, wider at the heel, and ball, an hourglass shape. This was different. It was straighter, with the 5-toe impressions clearly visible and arranged in a way that wasn't quite right. They were deep, sunk heavily into the snow, showing the immense weight of whatever made them. I followed the trail with my eyes. They came out of the woods on the far side, crossed the field right to the spot where we'd seen it, and then the prints changed. They went from a walking gait to these huge, bounding impressions, the stride lengthening impossibly, exactly where it had taken off running. The evidence was right there, frozen in the snow. It wasn't my imagination. I saw similar prints another time in the spring, in the thick mud near a swampy area deeper in the woods. Same size, same straight, non-human shape. And then there were the sounds. Over the years, I've heard things in those woods that still, to this day, make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It's not the normal sounds of the forest. I know what a fox scream sounds like. I know coyotes yipping. I know owls hooting. This was different. Sometimes, usually around dusk or just after dark, you'd hear this deep, moaning howl. It wasn't a wolf. It was lower, guttural, and it seemed to vibrate in your bones. It was a sound of pure loneliness and raw power that made you want to curl into a ball. Other times, there were these short, sharp yells, almost like a person shouting from a long way away, but distorted wrong. There were hoots that didn't have the rhythm of an owl, and high-pitched whistles that would cut through the night air, sounding almost like a signal. One incident in particular, just a couple of months after we saw it, in September of that same year, is burned into my memory. I was in my room, window open, and our dog, a big German shepherd who was afraid of nothing, started barking his head off down in the yard. It was that frantic, alarmed bark he only used when something was really wrong. I heard my dad yell at him to be quiet from inside the house. The dog kept barking, this frenzied, scared sound, and then from the woods, maybe a couple 100 yards away, came this howl. It was the same deep moaning howl I'd come to dread, but this time it was louder, closer, and it was a direct response. The second it sounded, the dog's barking cut off instantly. Not a whimper, not a growl, just silence. I looked out my window and saw him, tail tucked between his legs, slinking back towards the house, looking over his shoulder. Whatever was out there had just told him to shut up, and he'd listened. That's the feeling that has never left me. The vigilance, the fear. It's not a constant screaming terror, but a low, persistent hum in the background of my life whenever I'm near those woods. It's the knowledge that something is out there, something that doesn't fit, something that shouldn't exist. That initial sighting only lasted maybe 10 seconds, but the impact of it, the sheer unnatural speed of its flight, proved to me that we are not alone in those woods. We're just sharing the space with something else, something I can't explain, something that leaves straight footprints and makes sounds that don't belong in this world. I'm a grown man now, but I still won't go into those woods after dark. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the woods get too quiet, I'll find myself standing perfectly still, listening, and I can feel that cold knot in my stomach from all those years ago, tighter than ever. I saw it, I heard it, and I have absolutely no idea what it was. Story 15. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while, and I don't really know how to start, but I need to get it out. I've been hiking in northern Washington for years, mostly around the Cascades, and I've always loved it out here. It's my escape. The quiet, the trees, the way everything feels alive but peaceful. But what happened to me last month, I still can't wrap my head around it. I've told a couple of close friends, but they kind of just nod and change the subject, so I'm putting it here, because maybe someone else has felt this kind of thing. I'm not looking for attention or anything. I just need to say it to people who might get it. It was a Tuesday in early October, I remember, because the leaves were starting to turn, but it wasn't cold yet. The air had that crisp feel, like summer was hanging on, but fall was creeping in. I'd taken the day off work. I do that sometimes, just to clear my head. My job's nothing special, office stuff, and hiking is where I feel real. That day, I decided to hit one of my usual trails, one I've been on dozens of times. It's not too far from where I live, maybe an hour's drive out, deep in the woods near the Cascade foothills. I know this trail like the back of my hand. It starts off easy, then climbs up through some dense forest, and there's a spot about 2 hours in where you can see a small creek if you veer off a bit. I wasn't planning anything crazy, just a solo hike to unwind. I parked my car at the trailhead around 10 in the morning. The sky was overcast, but not in a gloomy way, more like a soft gray blanket that made the greens of the trees pop. I slung my backpack over my shoulders. I always pack light. Water, a sandwich, a first aid kit and my phone, though service is spotty out there. I started walking and at first everything felt normal. The trail was damp from recent rain, so my boots made this soft squelching sound on the mud. I could hear birds chirping, squirrels rustling in the underbrush, all the usual noises. It was peaceful, and I was just taking it all in, breathing deep, feeling the strain in my legs as I climbed. About an hour in, I reached a part of the trail that's a bit steeper, with big Douglas firs towering overhead. The canopy was thick, so it felt darker, like I was walking into a tunnel. I remember stopping to take a sip of water, and that's when I first noticed something off. The air, it changed. It wasn't just the temperature dropping, it felt heavier, like the humidity had spiked. But there was this stillness that made my skin prickle. I've been in forests when a storm's coming, and it's similar, but this was different. There was no wind, no rustle of leaves, just this dead quiet. And then I realized the birds had stopped singing, like completely. No chirps, no calls, nothing. Even the squirrels were gone. It was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I froze for a second, just standing there, listening. My first thought was maybe a predator was around, a bear or a cougar. I've seen bears out here before, and they usually make the wildlife go quiet. But this felt heavier, more intense. I started scanning the trees, my eyes darting around, but I didn't see anything. My breath was coming a little faster, and I could feel this knot tightening in my stomach. I told myself to calm down, that it was probably nothing, but my body wasn't buying it. I had this urge to turn back, but I pushed on because, I'm not one to spook easily. I've hiked this trail in the dark before, and nothing bad ever happened. I kept walking, but slower now, more cautious. The trail curved ahead, and I remember the ground was littered with pine needles, so my steps were almost silent. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, movement. I turned my head, and there, maybe 30 feet away, behind a thick cedar tree, was something. At first I thought it was a person, maybe another hiker, but then I saw the size. It was huge, way taller than a man, and covered in dark, shaggy hair. It was peeking out from behind the tree, just its head and part of its shoulder visible. The hair was a deep brown, almost black, and it looked matted, like it had been through rain and mud. My heart just dropped. It felt like it stopped for a second, then started hammering so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my hands clutching the straps of my backpack so tight my knuckles went white. And then it turned its head, and we locked eyes. That's the part that haunts me. The eyes. They weren't animal eyes, not like a bear's or a deer's. They were intelligent, deep-set, and dark, but with this awareness. It felt like it was studying me, taking me in, and in that moment, I knew it wasn't just some animal. It was something else, something I'd heard stories about but never believed. The terror was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't just fear, it was this primal dread that seeped into my bones. My mouth went dry and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, even though the air was cool. My legs felt weak, like jelly, and I had to fight the urge to run, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Run from danger. But something in me knew that if I ran, it might chase me, and I'd never outrun it. So I just stood there, frozen, staring back. The silence was deafening. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. It felt like minutes, but it was probably only seconds. The creature didn't move, just kept looking at me. Its face was broad, with a heavy brow, and the hair around it was long and tangled. I could see the muscles in its shoulder, how powerful it looked, like it could snap a tree in half. There was no aggression in its stance, though. It was calm, almost curious. But that didn't make it less frightening. If anything, it made it worse, because it felt like it was making a choice to look at me, to see what I was. Then, slowly, it pulled back behind the tree. Just like that, it was gone. I didn't see it move away. One moment it was there, The next it wasn't. The woods were still silent, and the heavy air pressed down on me. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. What was that, a bear? No. Bears don't stand like that, don't have that kind of posture, and they don't peek from behind trees with that kind of intent. This was different. This was Bigfoot. I'd always laughed at those stories, thought they were myths for gullible people, but in that moment I knew with every fiber of my being that I'd seen something that shouldn't exist. My body started to tremble, a full body shake that I couldn't control. I forced myself to take a step back, then another. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the spot where it had been, walking backwards slowly, my boots scraping softly on the ground. Every sound I made seemed amplified, and I was terrified that any noise would bring it back. My backpack felt heavier, like it was weighing me down, and I had this irrational fear that I'd drop something and it would attract attention. I kept backing up until I was around the bend in the trail, out of sight of that tree. Then I turned and started walking properly, but still slow, my steps careful. I didn't run. I remembered reading somewhere that you shouldn't run from predators, and even though this wasn't a predator in the usual sense, it felt like the same rule applied. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel the adrenaline making my hands shake. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see it following me, but there was nothing. Just the empty trail, the silent trees. The hike back felt like it took forever. The birds started chirping again after about 10 minutes, like someone had flipped a switch. The air lightened up, and the normal forest sounds returned, but it didn't comfort me. If anything, it made me more uneasy, because it highlighted how wrong things had been before. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The way it looked, the eyes, the silence. I'd never felt so small, so vulnerable. I've been scared before, like when I twisted my ankle on a hike and had to limp out. But this was different. This was a fear that went deeper, into a place where logic doesn't reach. When I finally got back to my car, I was drenched in sweat, even though I hadn't been moving fast. My hands were still trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a few minutes, breathing heavily. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, and my eyes were wide, like I'd seen a ghost. I drove home in a daze, not even turning on the radio. I kept expecting to see something in the woods along the road, but nothing happened. I didn't tell anyone at first. When I got home, I just went straight to the shower and stood under the hot water for a long time, trying to wash off the feeling, but it didn't help. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes staring back at me. I'd jump at little noises, like the house settling or a car passing outside. It's been weeks now, and I still get edgy when I'm in quiet places. I haven't gone back to that trail, and I'm not sure I ever will. What gets me is the not knowing. Why did it show itself? Was it just curious, or was there something more? I've read up on Bigfoot sightings since then, and a lot of people talk about that intelligent stare, like it's assessing you. I don't have any answers, and that's the scariest part. I saw something that day that changed how I see the world. The woods aren't just peaceful anymore, they're hiding things we're not supposed to see, and every time I think about it, I feel that same chill, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I know how this sounds, like some crazy story made up for clicks, but I swear this is real. I lived it, and I'll never forget the way it felt to be looked at by something that shouldn't exist. Story 16. It was the summer of 2009, and I was 22 years old and stupid. I thought I was the king of the woods. My family owns a big piece of land in Louisiana, 2,000 acres of thick, swampy forest that's been in the family for generations. I decided I was going to prove myself, to test my survival skills by camping out there alone for a whole month. Just me, a tent, a sleeping bag, some basic food, and a water filter. And my granddad's old flare gun. He insisted I take it. For emergencies, he'd said, his voice all gravelly. You never know. I'd laughed it off back then. I wasn't laughing for long. The first week was fine, almost peaceful. I set up my camp near a bend in a slow-moving creek, a spot I'd been to a dozen times before with my family. It was familiar. I hung my hammock between two sturdy pines, set up a little tarp for a rain shelter, and built a solid fire pit. I remember feeling proud of my little setup. I was doing it. I was living off the land. But then the little things started. It was subtle at first, stuff you could explain away if you tried hard enough. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me a few days in, late one afternoon. It wasn't a normal woodsy smell, not like damp earth or rotting leaves. This was a thick, heavy, sour stench, like really bad body odor mixed with something rotten, something dead. It would come and go on the wind, and every time it washed over the camp, it made the back of my throat feel tight. I told myself it was probably a dead animal somewhere nearby, a deer or a possum that had crawled under a log to die. But it didn't smell like any dead animal I'd ever come across. Then there was the silence. The woods are never truly silent, but out there, around my camp, they got that way. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. The usual chatter of birds, the scuttling of squirrels in the leaves, the buzzing of insects. It would all just stop. Abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch, and in that silence you'd hear other things, things that didn't belong. Knocks. That was the weirdest one. Not like a woodpecker, that's a rapid, rattling sound. This was a single, solid thwack. And then a few seconds later, another one from a different direction. Like something big and hard was being smacked against a tree trunk. It sounded hollow and deep, and it carried through the woods in a way that made my skin prickle. I'd stand there, frozen, straining my ears, and all I'd get was that oppressive silence, broken by another lone, echoing knock from way off in the distance. I tried to tell myself it was a beaver slapping its tail on the water, but I was miles from any beaver dam I knew of, and the sound was just wrong. It came from the trees. One night I heard what I thought was a woman screaming. It was far away, but it was clear as day. A long, piercing, terrified shriek that cut right through me. My heart just about jumped out of my chest. I sat bolt upright in my hammock, my hands shaking. But then I calmed myself down. I'd heard foxes before. They could sound like a woman being murdered. Yeah, that had to be it, a fox. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. It's just a fox. It's just a fox. The unease kept building, though, brick by brick. I started feeling watched. Not the casual feeling you sometimes get in the woods, but the intense, specific pressure, like a physical weight between my shoulder blades. I'd be gathering firewood and I'd spin around, certain someone was right behind me. There was never anything there, just the trees, standing still and silent. The turning point, the moment I couldn't explain it away anymore, was when I found the tracks. I was walking back from the creek with a full water bag, and I saw them in the soft, muddy bank. They weren't bear tracks. I know bear tracks. These were round, perfectly, weirdly round, like someone had pressed a billiard ball into the mud over and over, but they were huge. Each one was bigger than my hand, with my fingers spread wide, and they led in a straight, deliberate line from the deep woods right up to the edge of my camp, stopping just short of where I'd piled my firewood. They just stopped, as if whatever made them had stood there for a long time, looking at my stuff. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I didn't know what could make a track like that. I still don't. That night, the fear really set its hooks in me. I was sitting by my fire, trying to eat some beans, and I heard this heavy, wet breathing from the darkness just beyond the firelight. It was loud, a deep huff, 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 like a big dog, but deeper, much deeper. I held my own breath, my spoon frozen halfway to my mouth. Then, from maybe 50 yards away, came that scream again. But this time it wasn't distant. It was close. It wasn't a fox. It was lower, guttural, and full of this pure, raw fury that vibrated in my bones. Right after the scream, something massive crashed through the brush. I don't mean a deer leaping away. I mean it sounded like a truck was plowing through the undergrowth, snapping branches and trampling everything in its path. It circled my camp, a full, fast circle, and then the sound just vanished. The woods went dead silent again. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat with my back against a tree, the flare gun in my lap, and stared into the blackness until the sun came up. The next day was the last day. I was a wreck. I was jumpy, exhausted, my nerves were completely shot. I decided I was going to pack up and hike out at first light the next morning. I just had to get through one more night. I was trying to act normal, to go through my routines. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. It was getting dark, and I needed to purify more water from the creek. I had these little tablets you drop in your bottle. I shook the plastic bottle, the one with the tablets inside, to mix them up. Shika, shika, shika. The sound of the pills rattling in the plastic was sharp in the evening quiet. And then, from the trees on the other side of the creek, maybe 30 yards away, I heard it. Shika, shika, shika. An exact, perfect mimic of the sound. My blood went cold. It wasn't an echo. It came from a specific spot. It was a copy. I fumbled for my big maglite flashlight, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack. I clicked it on and swept the beam across the creek. The light landed on a fat possum, frozen in the beam, its eyes glowing. I almost laughed with relief. A possum. Of course, it must have been rustling around, making some similar noise. But then, from right behind where the possum was, maybe 10 feet deeper into the brush, a scream blasted out. It was so loud, so deafeningly close that I actually stumbled backward and fell on my ass. The sound was physical, a wave of pressure that hit me in the chest. The possum scurried away. And in that same instant, I saw 2 points of eyeshine, high up in the darkness behind where the possum had been. Really high up. Way too high for any animal I knew. They were a dull reddish-orange color, and they were just fixed on me. I scrambled to my feet, backing toward my fire, the flashlight beam dancing wildly. I heard a single loud snap from the creek bed. It was the sound of a thick, dry branch breaking. I swung the light toward the sound, and I saw it. It was standing in the middle of the creek, the water swirling around its massive legs. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be close to 10 feet. It was built like a powerlifter, covered in dark, matted hair that was wet and shaggy. The shoulders were impossibly broad. Its arms were long, hanging past its knees, and ended in hands, not paws. I could see that clearly. The face, God, the face. It wasn't a gorilla. It was flatter, more human-like, but twisted with this raw, primal anger. Its eyes were dark pits, but I could feel its gaze locked onto me. It wasn't just looking at me, it was looking into me. It let out this low, rumbling growl that didn't seem to come from its throat, but from the earth itself. It vibrated up through the soles of my boots. The smell hit me then, that same sour, rotten stench, but 1,000 times stronger, so thick I could taste it at the back of my tongue. It was a smell of musk and rage and something ancient. It took one step toward the bank, one step toward me. My brain just shut off. Every thought, every ounce of reason just vanished, replaced by a single white-hot command from the most primitive part of my mind: survive. My hand, acting on its own, brought the flare gun up. I didn't aim, I just pointed it in the thing's general direction and pulled the trigger. The world exploded in a blaze of brilliant red light. The flare shot out, hissing and trailing smoke, and lit up the entire creek bed in a hellish, pulsating glow. For a split second I saw the creature perfectly, illuminated in that bloody red light. Its face was contorted in what looked like surprise and fury. It let out a shocked, deafening roar that was 10 times louder than the scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and then it moved. It didn't run like a man or an animal. It turned and bounded away in 2, maybe 3 enormous, powerful strides, crashing through the brush on the other side of the creek and disappearing into the blackness. The sound of its movement faded almost instantly. It was just gone. I stood there, shaking so badly I could barely stand, the acrid smell of the spent flare cartridge filling my nose. The woods were silent again, the most profound, terrifying silence I have ever heard. It felt like only seconds later, though it must have been a few minutes, that I heard the distant buzz of ATV engines. My grandpa and my uncle, they'd heard the flare. They came roaring into my camp, their headlights cutting through the dark. I must have looked like a ghost, because my grandpa just looked at me, his face pale, and said, "What in God's name happened, son?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger toward the creek. They helped me onto one of the four-wheelers, and we got out of there. We didn't even bother packing my gear, we just left. The next morning, in the clear light of day, we went back with a couple of other men from the family, all of us armed. We went to get my stuff. The campsite was destroyed. It wasn't just messy, it was a statement. My hammock was ripped to shreds. The ropes snapped like they were thread. My gear was scattered everywhere, some of it smashed, some of it thrown high up into the branches of trees. The fire pit was kicked apart, stones flung in all directions, and everywhere in the mud around the camp were more of those big, round billiard ball tracks, a lot of them, different sizes. It looked like a whole group of them had come through after I left and just trashed the place. We didn't stick around. We grabbed what was left of my stuff and got off that part of the property for good. I've never gone camping alone again, not once. I can't even sleep in my own backyard without a big fire going. I'm 37 now, and I still sleep with a light on sometimes. It's not the size of the thing that haunts me, or even its roar. It's the intelligence. The way it mimicked the sound of my water bottle, the way it watched me for days, the way it and its kind came back after I was gone and tore my camp apart like a warning. A message. I went out there to test myself against the wilderness, and I found out the wilderness holds things we're not supposed to see, and I saw one of them. It saw me, and I know in my gut that it remembers. Story 17. It was one of those mornings that starts too early and feels like it'll never end. The kind of cold that gets right into your bones. The damp Arkansas air clinging to my wool shirt like a second skin. Late autumn, maybe early November of 1834. I remember the date because it was just after the first real hard frost, the one that killed off the last of the garden greens back at the cabin. I was out in that stretch of woods between St. Francis and what we called Greene County, a real tangled mess of ridges and hollows full of oak and hickory. I'd been hunting these woods since I was a boy, knew every creek and deer trail for miles. Or I thought I did. The light was just starting to bleed through the trees, turning the world from black to a dull grayish blue. Everything was quiet, the way it only is, right before the sun comes up. No birds yet, no squirrels chattering, just the crunch of my own boots on the frosty leaves and the sound of my own breathing. I had my flintlock rifle, a good solid piece I'd traded for 2 years prior, and a pouch full of shot. I was hoping for a deer, something to see us through the coming weeks, but I'd have been happy with a turkey. You take what the woods give you. I'd been walking for maybe an hour, following a game trail along a ridge, when I first saw the sign. It wasn't deer sign. It was a break in some saplings, young trees about as thick as my wrist, snapped off clean about 5 feet up. Not chewed by a bear, not rubbed by a buck, snapped like something big had just pushed through and didn't care what was in its way. I stopped and looked at it, my breath puffing out in little clouds. I ran a hand over the splintered wood. It was fresh, the sap still wet and sticky. That got my attention. Nothing I knew of around here was that strong or that tall to break trees at that height. A bull elk might, but we hadn't seen elk in these parts for years. I pushed the thought down. Maybe a storm did it, or a falling limb. but the sky was clear. I kept moving, but my senses were sharper now. I was listening, really listening, not just for game, but for anything out of place. The woods were waking up. A woodpecker started in somewhere. The sound like a little hammer tapping. A jay scolded. Normal sounds, but the feeling in my gut, that low hum of unease, it didn't go away. It was another half hour later when I found the track. I almost missed it, my mind on the broken trees. But there, in a patch of soft mud near a seep spring, was a print. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart, which had been beating a steady, lazy rhythm, suddenly felt like a trapped bird fluttering against my ribs. It was a footprint, but it wasn't a bear's. A bear print has claws, a pad, it's animal. This was different. It was long, maybe 18 inches from heel to toe, and wide. It had a shape, an arch, and 5 toes. They were clear in the mud. The big toe was the largest, and the others got smaller, just like a man's foot. But no man ever born had a foot that size. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the quiet. The mud was cold. I laid my hand next to it. My hand, from wrist to fingertip, was a good 8 inches. This print was more than twice that long. The depth of it was what got me. This thing was heavy, immensely heavy. The mud had been pressed down a good 3-4 inches. I looked around, my head on a swivel, the stock of my flintlock feeling slick in my suddenly sweaty hand. The woods felt different now. The trees seemed closer, the shadows between them darker, deeper. That feeling of being alone, which I usually cherished, curdled into a feeling of being watched. I followed the tracks. They were easy to see now that I knew what I was looking for. They led away from the spring, up a slope, through a thicket of brambles that were torn and trampled. This thing didn't go around anything, it went through. The sheer power that implied made my mouth go dry. I've tracked big bears. They're strong, sure, but they're also cautious, quiet. This was brutish, indifferent. The sun was fully up now, casting long, sharp shadows. The normalcy of the daylight should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It just illuminated the scale of what I was seeing. I came to a place where the creature had stopped, its feet dug into the earth, as if it had stood here for a while. There were scuff marks, and there was a smell. I caught it on a shift of the wind, and it made my nose wrinkle. It was a thick, heavy smell, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something foul and rotten, like old meat or a bog. It was a smell that didn't belong in these clean woods. That's when I heard the first sound. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was a low, guttural whoop, followed by a series of shorter, huffing grunts. The sound came from down in the hollow below me, maybe a couple 100 yards away. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the still air with a weird, hollow quality that made the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand straight up. I'd heard every sound the American wilderness has to offer. The scream of a panther, the bugle of an elk, the deep-throated bawl of a bear. This was none of those. It was something else entirely. It was a voice, but not a human one. It was a sound that had no business existing. I froze, my body going stiff. I crouched low, instinctively, pressing myself against the rough bark of a big hickory tree. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples. I tried to slow my breathing, to listen. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the thumping of my own blood in my ears. Then, from the same direction, came a sound that was even worse. It was a crack, a loud, sharp report of a big branch breaking. Not a deadfall snapping. This was a green limb, thick and healthy, being shattered by pure force. Curiosity is a hell of a thing. It's what gets cats killed, and it's what overrides the pure animal terror screaming at you to run. I had to see. I just had to. I started moving again, not down into the hollow, but along the ridge, keeping to the high ground, moving from tree to tree like a shadow. My progress was slow, careful. Every rustle of a leaf under my foot sounded like a thunderclap to my own ears. I reached a spot where the ridge jutted out, giving me a clear view down into the hollow. The trees were thinner there, a mix of sycamores and birch along a small creek, and that's when I saw it. It was standing halfway across the creek, its back mostly to me. For a second, my brain refused to make sense of the shape. It was just a mass of dark, wet hair towering over the creek bank. Then the details slammed into me, one after another, like physical blows. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall if it stood up straight. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, slabs of muscle covered in long, shaggy hair that was a dark reddish-brown, like old rust or dried blood. The hair was matted and wet from the creek, plastered to its body. Its legs were thick as tree trunks, powerful. It was standing in a slightly stooped posture, but even bent over, its sheer mass was staggering. It must have weighed 500 pounds. Easy, maybe more. It was turning its head slowly, scanning the far bank. I saw the profile. It wasn't a bear. A bear's face is all muzzle. This had a flatter face. A heavy brow ridge shadowed its eyes, but I could see the shape of a nose, a mouth. It was like looking at a man, but a man twisted and stretched into something primal and monstrous. The arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick with corded muscle, ending in hands that I couldn't see clearly, but that looked dark and powerful. It took a step, moving out of the creek and onto the bank. The movement was fluid, powerful, not the clumsy shuffle of a bear. It was a walk, a purposeful, ground-eating stride that covered distance with an easy, terrifying grace. It stopped by a large sycamore and reached up with one of those long arms. It didn't jump or strain. It just reached up over 9 feet off the ground and wrapped its hand around a thick limb. Then it pulled. There was a sound of groaning, tearing wood, and the limb, as thick as my thigh, snapped off like a dry twig. It held the limb for a moment, then dropped it with a crash onto the forest floor, as if it were nothing more than a bothersome branch in its way. I couldn't breathe. I was literally holding my breath, my lungs burning. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip my rifle with both hands to keep it from shaking. The cold metal of the barrel was a stark contrast to the feverish heat of my skin. This was no animal. This was something else, something that shouldn't be. The stories the old trappers would tell around the fire, the whispers of giant hairy men in the mountains. I'd always laughed them off. Tall tales for greenhorns. But here it was, not 50 yards from me, real and solid and breathing. It turned then, not all the way, but enough that I saw more of its face. The eyes. I'll never forget the eyes. They were a deep, intelligent brown, not the dull black beads of a bear. They held a awareness, a knowing, that was utterly chilling. They scanned the ridge, and for one heart-stopping second, I was sure they passed right over me. I pressed myself flatter against the tree, squeezing my eyes shut, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that it hadn't seen me. When I dared to look again, it was moving. It turned its massive body and started walking up the far side of the hollow away from me. Each step was a soft, heavy thump that I could feel through the ground. The smell came back on the wind, that foul, musky odor stronger now. I watched it go, its shaggy back moving through the undergrowth, just a shifting shadow among the trees. It didn't look back. It just disappeared into the deep woods, as silently as it had appeared. I didn't move for a long time. I don't know how long. I just stood there, leaning against that hickory tree, my legs feeling like water. The normal sounds of the forest had returned. Birds sang. A squirrel ran up a tree nearby. The world had gone back to normal, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it never really would be normal again. When I finally found the strength, I turned and started walking back the way I came. I didn't run. I just walked, my mind a blank, numb slate. I saw the giant footprints again, the broken trees, but they were just reminders now of a truth I couldn't unsee. I got back to my cabin as the sun was starting to dip below the trees. My wife asked if I'd had any luck. I just shook my head and put my rifle by the door. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. What would I say? That I saw a giant hairy man thing in the woods. They'd think I'd lost my mind. I went back to that hollow a week later with 2 other men from the settlement. We were armed and we were quiet. We found the place by the creek. The giant footprints were still there, though blurred by rain. The broken sycamore limb was still on the ground, already starting to wilt. But there was no sign of the creature, no new tracks, no sounds, no smell. It was just gone. But I know what I saw. I feel it every time I go into the deep woods now, that prickle on the back of my neck. That extra moment I spend scanning the shadows. The woods are big and old, and we don't know everything that's in them. We like to think we do, but we don't. There are things out there, things that walk on 2 legs and break trees with their bare hands and watch you with ancient, knowing eyes. And sometimes, on a quiet morning when the frost is thick on the ground, I'll stop and listen, and I'll wonder if it's listening back. Story 18. We were at this spot off the old roads, a place where people just dumped their trash. It wasn't an official dump or anything, just a clearing in the palmetto scrub and pine trees, where folks would bring their busted furniture, old appliances, bags of garbage, you name it. My grandma was a bit of a scavenger. She hated wasting anything, and if she could find something someone else threw out that she could fix up or use for parts, she'd take it. So that's what we were doing that day. My grandma, my mom, my sister, who was probably about 7 or 8, and me, just a toddler. My mom says it was a bright, hot day, the kind of Florida heat that hits you like a wall when you step out of the car. The air so thick with humidity you feel like you're breathing water. The sun was brutal, bouncing off the white sand and bits of broken glass and metal. The place stank, a normal trash dump smell of rot and hot plastic and God knows what else. Flies were buzzing everywhere. My mom had me on her hip, and my sister was poking at something with a stick, bored. Grandma was over by a pile of junk, looking at an old wooden chair with a broken leg, seeing if it was worth taking. My mom says the first thing that changed was the birds. The constant chirping and squawking from the trees just stopped, all at once. It went dead quiet, except for the flies. She said it felt like the whole world had taken a breath and held it. She remembers feeling a chill, a real physical coldness go down her back, even in that blistering heat. She thought maybe it was a snake, a big python or something, and she pulled my sister closer to her. Then they heard it, a sound from the tree line. Not a bird, not an animal they knew. A low, guttural grunt, like a pig but deeper, with more force behind it. Then another one, closer this time. My grandma stood up straight from where she was crouched by the chair. My mum says the look on her face was one she'd never seen before, a kind of pure, unthinking alarm. My grandma was a tough woman, a farmer's daughter, not much scared her, but she was scared then. That's when it came out of the trees. It didn't step out, my mom says. It emerged. It was big. So much bigger than a man. It was covered, and I mean completely covered, from the top of its head down to its feet, in this matted, tangled hair. My mom always describes the color as a red-brown, like rust and dirt mixed together. It wasn't sleek like an ape in a zoo. It was shaggy, wild, clumped with leaves and twigs, and it was naked, just this thing covered in this thick pelt of hair. It saw them immediately. Its head turned, and it locked onto them, and it started moving toward them. It wasn't a run, not at first. It was a fast, aggressive walk, a loping stride that covered ground terrifyingly quickly. Its arms were long, swinging at its sides, and my mom said the way it moved was powerful, like its whole body was just coiled muscle, and it was making those grunting sounds the whole time, low and loud. Panic. That's the only word for it. Pure, absolute panic. My mom says her brain just short-circuited. There was no thought, just a screaming instinct to run. She yelled my sister's name, grabbed her by the arm, and yanked her so hard she almost fell. My grandma was already moving, shouting, "The car! Get to the car!" The car was my grandma's old Chevy, parked about 50 yards away on the dirt path. 50 yards. It might as well have been a mile. My mom had me on one hip, my sister's wrist in her other hand, and she was running, stumbling in the sand and trash. Her heart hammering in her ears so loud she could barely hear my grandma shouting. She didn't dare look back. She didn't need to. She could hear it. The grunting was getting closer, and she could hear the heavy, thudding footsteps crunching through the underbrush. My sister, she remembers this part clearer than anyone. She says she looked back. Just once. She says its face. It wasn't like a gorilla. It was flatter. It had these dark, deep-set eyes and a wide nose and a mouth that was just a line, but it was pulled back in what looked like a snarl. She says it looked angry. Not like an animal surprised, but genuinely, purposefully angry. They reached the car. My grandma was fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key into the door lock. It was an old car. You had to unlock the driver's side door manually. My mom was screaming, "Hurry, Ma, hurry!" She shoved my sister into the back seat and practically threw me in after her, then scrambled into the passenger side herself. She slammed the door shut and locked it. That's when the smell hit them. Even with the windows up, it flooded the car, an overwhelming, suffocating stench. My mum describes it as a mix of rotten eggs and spoiled meat, with something else underneath, something foul and musky, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead. It was so strong it made their eyes water. My sister says she started gagging. My grandma finally got the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine coughed and sputtered. It was an old car. It didn't always start right away. My mom says that was the most terrifying few seconds of her life. The sound of the engine grinding, and right outside, the sound of those heavy footsteps right next to the car now. They all turned to look. The thing was right there, just outside my mom's window. It was so close she could see the individual clumps of hair, could see the dirt and grime caked on it. It was standing on two legs, and it was huge. Towering over the car, it leaned down and its face was right at the window. My mom says it didn't look curious. It looked intense. Its eyes were fixed on them, moving from her to my grandma, to us kids in the back. My sister was crying, curled up on the floor of the back seat. I was just a baby, probably just staring, not understanding any of it. It raised one of its arms, and my mom flinched, thinking it was going to smash the window, but it just placed its hand flat against the glass. The hand was massive, covered in the same reddish-brown hair, with thick, blunt fingers. It left a greasy, smeared print on the window. Then the engine caught. It roared to life. My grandma, without even thinking, just slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the sand, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris, and the car lurched forward. As we pulled away, my mum forced herself to look back out the rear window. The thing was just standing there in the middle of the dirt path, watching us go. It didn't chase. It didn't make another sound. It just stood there, its arm lowered now, until the dust cloud hid it from view. The drive home was dead silent. No one spoke. My sister was still sobbing quietly on the floor. I was probably just confused by all the tension. My mum says she just stared straight ahead, her whole body trembling, that rotten smell still clinging to the inside of the car, clinging to our clothes. When they got back to my grandma's house, they all just sat in the car for a few minutes in the driveway. Nobody wanted to get out. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, my grandma turned off the engine, and the silence was even heavier. That's when the stories started to diverge, just a little, in the way family stories do. My mum to this day insists it looked more like a man than an ape, a big, hairy, naked man. She says the proportions were human-like, just massive. The face, while frightening, had a human quality to it. She calls it a big, hairy hippie, which was a frame of reference she had back then. My sister, on the other hand, has always been adamant it was a Bigfoot. She saw the same thing, but her young mind went to the legends, to the monster movies. She saw a monster. My grandma, when she was alive, her version was pretty much in the middle. A creature, something that shouldn't exist. They never went back to that dump. They never reported it to the police. Who would have believed them? A giant, smelly, hairy thing in the Florida scrub. They'd have been laughed at. So they just kept it to themselves, a secret horror shared between them. And me, I have nothing, no memory, no fear, no smell, no face at the window. It's the strangest feeling to have this traumatic, defining event for your family be a complete blank for you. It's like a ghost limb of a memory. I know it's there, I know it's part of my history, but I can't feel it, I can't access it. I've spent my whole life listening to them tell it, watching my mum's hands shake even 60 years later, seeing the genuine fear in my sister's eyes, and I just have to take their word for it. I've tried to find the spot on Google Maps. Homestead has changed so much. It's all subdivisions and strip malls now. That wild, trash-strewn clearing is probably a parking lot. There's no trace of it left, just like there's no trace in my mind. Sometimes I'll catch a whiff of something foul, like sulfur from a hot spring or really spoiled garbage, and for a split second, my heart will jump. But it's not a memory. It's just a reaction to a story I've heard too many times. I wish I could remember. I wish I could close my eyes and see that face, smell that smell, feel that terror. Not because I want to be scared, but because I want to know. I want to know what it really was that came out of the trees that day. Was it a man, a monster, something in between? My family's only proof is their own fear, a fear that has lasted a lifetime, and I'm the only one who doesn't share it. I'm just left with the echo and the question that will never, ever be answered. A Twisted Lay. Story 19. All right, I'll just write it down. I don't know what else to do with this. It's been a long time, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like it was yesterday. I need to get this out, just to see if putting it into words makes it feel any less real. I doubt it will. It was August of 1861. The heat that summer was thick and heavy, like a wet wool blanket you couldn't shake off. The air in the woods around Bennington and over near North Adams didn't move. It just hung there, smelling of pine rot and damp earth. The crops were suffering, and so were the people. We were all on edge anyway, with talk of war simmering down south, a constant low dread in the back of every man's mind. But our immediate fear was a lot closer to home. It started with stories. You know how it is. A farmer finds a sheep torn apart, not by wolves. The work was too messy, too violent. A hunter comes back white as a sheet, swearing he saw something tall and manlike, but all wrong, watching him from the tree line. At first, it was just talk for the general store, something to pass the time. But then the stories got more frequent, more specific. A woman hanging laundry saw a dark, hairy shape standing at the edge of her property, just staring. Children told their parents about a big, hairy man in the woods who made grunting sounds. The laughter stopped. The talk got quieter, more serious. The final straw was the Larson kid. He'd been out checking his trapline and came running back to his farm, his face scratched up from branches, his eyes wild. He babbled about a monster, a stinking gorilla-like thing that stood on two legs and followed him, making a low, guttural sound deep in its chest. He said it smelled like old meat and dirt. That's when the panic set in. This wasn't a shadow or a spook story anymore. This was something that had chased one of our own. So a group of us men decided to form a search party. It wasn't an official thing. No sheriff or mayor leading it, just neighbors. Men who owned rifles and knew these woods. We met up that morning at first light, right at the crossroads where the Larson property met the deep woods. There were about 10 of us. I remember the feeling, a kind of grim purpose. We were scared, sure. Anyone who says they weren't is a liar, but there was also a sense that we were taking back our land. We were going to find this thing, this animal, and put an end to the fear. The plan was simple. We'd fan out in a line, about 20 paces apart, and sweep through a section of the forest where most of the recent sightings had been. We moved slow, real slow. Every snap twig sounded like a gunshot. Every rustle in the undergrowth made your heart jump into your throat. The woods were too quiet. That was the first thing that felt wrong. No birdsong, no chattering squirrels. It was a dead quiet, the kind that presses in on your ears. We'd been walking for maybe 2 hours, the sun getting higher, the heat getting worse. Sweat was pouring down my back, soaking my shirt. My hands were slick on the stock of my old Springfield rifle. I was looking at the ground, watching my step when I heard it. Not a loud sound. It was a low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It wasn't a woodpecker. It was heavier, deeper, like someone hitting a tree with a big club. The man to my left, old Mr. Henderson, held up a closed fist. We all stopped. The whole line just froze. We stood there, not moving, barely breathing, listening to that sound. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from up ahead, just beyond a thicket of young birch trees. It felt like a challenge, a warning. We moved forward again, but slower now, our rifles coming up to our shoulders. We crept through the birch trees, the white bark seeming too bright in the gloom. And then we saw it. The clearing wasn't big, maybe 30 feet across, and it was there in the middle. It's hard to describe, even now. My mind still fights against what my eyes saw. It was big. Lord, it was big. Taller than any man I'd ever seen. Must have been 7.5, 8 feet tall if it was an inch. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear. It was long and shaggy, a dark reddish-brown color, matted and filthy. It was built like a man, but all wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick, corded with muscle. Its shoulders were massive, hunched. It had its back to us, and it was the one making the sound. It was pounding one of its huge clenched fists against the trunk of an old oak tree. Thump, thump, thump. The power in those blows was terrifying. You could see the whole tree shudder, but the worst part was the smell. The Larson kid was right. It hit me then, a wave of it, and I almost gagged. It was a thick, heavy stench, like a combination of a rotting carcass, wet dog, and something else. Something foul and musky I can't even name. It was the smell of something wild and unclean, and it filled the whole clearing. We just stood there at the edge of the trees, frozen. I think for a few seconds none of us could process it. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a madman. This was something else, something that shouldn't be. Then it stopped pounding the tree. It went perfectly still, and it started to turn. It moved slowly, deliberately. It didn't jerk or startle like an animal. It turned its head first, and I saw its profile. The head was cone-shaped, sloping back from heavy brow ridges. I couldn't see its eyes clearly from that distance, just dark sockets under that heavy brow. Its face was mostly flat, with a wide, flat nose. It didn't have a long snout. It was almost human, but twisted, primal, ancient. Then its body followed, and it was facing us. Time just stopped. It stood there on 2 legs, its chest broad and barrel-like. Its arms hung loose, ending in hands that weren't paws, but weren't quite human hands either. Thick-fingered, powerful-looking. It was completely still, just looking at our line of men. It didn't make a sound. It just assessed us. I felt a cold dread wash over me, a kind of primal fear I didn't know I had in me. This wasn't the fear of a dangerous animal. This was the fear of the unknown, of seeing something that broke the rules of the world I knew. Its presence was immense, heavy. It felt intelligent. It felt old. Somebody, I don't know who, let out a choked gasp. That broke the spell. The creature's head tilted slightly. It let out a sound then, not a roar, but a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from the bottom of its lungs. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated in my chest. It was a sound of pure menace. "Shoot it!" someone yelled, his voice cracking with panic. It was like a dam broke. The silence erupted into the deafening crash of gunfire. I didn't even think. I raised my rifle, aimed at that massive, hairy chest, and pulled the trigger. The kick against my shoulder was familiar, but everything else was a nightmare. Smoke from the black powder filled the air, stinging my eyes. Through the haze, I saw the thing flinch. I saw a patch of its hair jerk, maybe where a ball had hit it. But it didn't cry out. It didn't fall. It just took a step back and then another. Its dark eyes, now I could see them, seemed to flash with something. Anger, maybe, or just a deep, wild cunning. Then it moved. It didn't run on all fours like a bear. It turned and ran on two legs with a speed and grace that was horrifying for something so huge. It was unbelievably fast, its long legs covering ground in huge, loping strides. It crashed through the undergrowth, not around it, just plowing through ferns and bushes like they weren't even there. The sound of its passage was like a small avalanche moving away from us. The shooting stopped. The sudden quiet was almost as shocking as the gunfire. We stood there, ears ringing, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with the lingering foul stench of the creature. We stared into the dense foliage where it had vanished. The woods were still. The thing was gone. For a full minute, nobody spoke. We just stood there, breathing hard, listening. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. My hands were trembling. I lowered my rifle, my arm feeling weak. Then we all started talking at once, voices low and shaky. "Did you see it?" "My God, what was that?" "I hit it, I know I did." "Did it even bleed?" We moved into the clearing, cautious, our rifles ready. The ground where it had been standing was churned up. We found the oak tree. The bark was splintered where it had been pounding it. The indentations from its fists were deep. We looked for blood, for any sign we'd wounded it. We found a few broken twigs, some disturbed leaves, but no blood, nothing. It was as if we'd shot at a ghost. We followed its trail for a while. It was easy to follow at first, a path of crushed plants and broken branches leading deeper into the woods, but after a few hundred yards it just stopped. The trail vanished at the base of a rocky ridge. There was no way something that big could have climbed those rocks without leaving a sign, and there was no cave or crevice it could have slipped into. It was just gone. We searched for the rest of the day until the light started to fail. The fear came back then, worse than before. We were deep in its territory now, and the sun was going down. We were the ones being hunted. Every shadow looked like a hunched form. Every night sound was its footsteps. We finally turned back, a silent, defeated group. We didn't talk much on the way home. What was there to say? We'd seen it. We'd all seen it. We'd fired a volley of rifle balls at it at close range, and it had just run off, seemingly unharmed. The memory of that thing, standing there looking at us, it's burned into me, the sheer size of it, the way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the smell, God, the smell. I can still smell it sometimes when the wind blows a certain way through the pines. We never found it. The sightings trickled off after that summer, and eventually people stopped talking about it. Life moved on. The war came and went. But I never forgot. None of us who were in that clearing ever did. I still live in these parts. I still walk in these woods, though never as deep as we went that day, and sometimes, when I'm out there alone and the woods go quiet, I stop. I listen. And I remember the feeling of being watched by something that wasn't supposed to exist. I remember the sound of its fist hitting that tree. I remember the look it gave us, not of a beast, but of something ancient and knowing, something that saw us as the trespassers. We went out there to hunt a monster. But I think in some way I still can't explain. It was the one who was showing us who was really in charge, and then it just left. It's still out there somewhere. I know it is. I can feel it.